Chapter 1701, War Summary. 1. At this moment, his personal terminal suddenly rang. He looked over and tapped gently. He saw his personal terminal tremble slightly before an icon was projected in front of him. It was the summary of today's war. Currently, the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom has a total of 3 large battlefields and 1 small battlefield. The main forces and god spirits of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom were fighting on these 4 battlefields, conquering more and more territory and resources for the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. The first battlefield was the Supreme Great Cosmos battlefield. Most of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's main army was fighting in the Supreme Great Cosmos. Their main battlefield was on the Supreme Great Cosmos. Currently, 3/5 of the entire continent was in Zhou Zhou's hands. As long as he conquered 2/5 of the remaining continent, the entire high continent would belong to Zhou Zhou. Zhou Zhou could not help but feel emotional looking at this. The high continent is certainly big enough. With his main combat army, conquering hundreds or even thousands of boundless universes in a day would not be a problem. However, even with such powerful strength, it still took such a long time to conquer so many territories in the face of the highest continent. From this, it could be seen how large the highest continent was. As for the second battlefield, it was the Crimson Great Cosmos battlefield that had just been opened today. The strength of the Crimson Great Cosmos was not inferior to the high continent at all. In fact, because the Crimson Great Cosmos followed the law of survival of the fittest, there were more lord factions and top-notch god spirits here, and their average strength was stronger. Zhou Zhou liked this second battlefield very much. It reminded Zhou Zhou of the Ultimate Void Battleground. During those days in the Ultimate Void Battleground, although the environment there was rather boring, it had to be said that there were really many experts there. With the help of the Ultimate Void race experts, the soldiers of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom grew rapidly. All kinds of god spirits, true god tiers, master god tiers, and supreme gods could be born one after another. Even though the war in the Ultimate Void Battleground had come to an end, he saw a new hope in the Scarlet Universe. He had already made plans. In the future, he would send more and more Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom soldiers and god spirits into the Crimson Great Cosmos. On one hand, he would conquer the territory of the Crimson Great Cosmos and harvest its resources. On the other hand, he would use the Crimson Great Cosmos as his training ground. This way, the soldiers under him could grow rapidly with the help of the Scarlet Life Form. Moreover, there was another benefit in the Crimson Great Cosmos. The Crimson Great Cosmos did not have so many complicated relationships that Zhou Zhou had to pay attention to. Let's just do it. Unlike the Supreme Great Cosmos, all kinds of relationships were intertwined. Before the battle, Zhou Zhou had to investigate the other party's background, afraid that he would hit a lord faction that had no conflict of interest with him. For example, the 2 supreme will-level factions, the Sun Divine Court and the Great Lunar Divine Court. These 2 major factions not only operated forces beside the Supreme Will, but they also had many forces distributed in the High Continent and even the entire myriad worlds. They were subordinate departments. Zhou Zhou had no intention or time to interact with these 2 factions for the time being. Therefore, when conquering the High Continent, he would deliberately avoid the subordinate departments of these 2 factions. Fortunately, the subordinate departments of these 2 factions were all non-lord factions. Their positions were neutral, so it did not affect Zhou Zhou's conquest of the entire High Continent. As for the third battlefield, it was where Zhou 11 and Zhou 12 headed to Tianjun's corpse today. There were a large number of supreme gods and even a small number of supreme willpower experts there. It was an excellent place for top-notch god spirits to increase their strength and collect resources. Zhou Zhou attached great importance to that place and regarded it as his third battlefield. As for the last small battlefield, it was the Ultimate Void Great Cosmos that Zhou 13 and Zhou 14 had gone to. The Ultimate Void Great Cosmos was mysterious and complicated. Even if they were very strong, it was very easy for them to encounter stronger enemies. However, they had more freedom of movement and were not restricted by the spatial venue. Therefore, Zhou Zhou called Zhou 13 and Zhou 14's locations as small battlefields. The word small naturally means small. It's not small. On the other hand, on the last small battlefield of the 3 major battlefields, the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's army and avatars had eliminated more than 500 billion god spirits, more than 600 million true god tiers, more than 400,000 master god tiers, more than 400 supreme gods, and 15 quasi-supreme willpower realm experts. Zhou Zhou's eyes lit up when he saw the statistics. Not bad, not bad. Unexpectedly, after leaving the ultimate void battleground, the number of enemies they eliminated every day did not decrease, but instead increased. He carefully looked at the data before understanding. As for the increase in the number of Master God tier, Supreme Gods, and Quasi-Supreme Willpower experts, most of them came from the place where Tianjun's corpse was. A small portion came from the enemies that Zhou 13 and Zhou 14 had dealt with along the way in the ultimate void great cosmos. Zhou Zhou nodded in satisfaction. It was a blessing in disguise. Even though he had lost the ultimate void battleground, he had found a better place to train his troops. With the existence of these 4 battlefields, the growth of his soldiers would definitely be greatly accelerated. Chapter 1702, War Summary 2. Then, he continued reading. With the combined efforts of the 4 battlefields, the statistics were as follows. The Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom had obtained a total of about 8,000 capital units worth of mist cores, origin crystals, skill books, equipment, and basic materials. 18 capital units, 2,837,189,143,871,823 green bronze tier Lord Talent crystal fragments. 3,588 units of Chaos Divine Treasure. 47,871,182 legendary tier and below Lord Talent spheres. A large number of Lord Talent crystal fragments of other levels. There were also 2 Guy Unit 1,323 capital units 2,381,817,350 million units of divine crystals from low tier to high tier deity level. 5,239,817,332,341 true God tier divine crystals. 3,231,134,714,378 Master God tier divine crystals. 232,119,273 Grade 1 to Grade 3 Supreme God divine crystals. 25 capital units had 23,310,827,314,000,000 lesser gods to high tier deity level divine artifacts. 42,229,380,000 true God tier divine artifacts. 61,199,027 Master God tier divine artifacts. 313,821 Supreme God divine artifacts. There were about 30 capital units with a total of 2,389,880 million divine spark fragments, God tier medicinal herbs, God tier ingredients, God tier ores, God tier blueprints, and other treasures. 5,239,129,372,637 Master God tier medicinal herbs, God tier ingredients, God tier ores, God tier blueprints, and other treasures. 3,122,371 Supreme God level God tier herbs, God tier ingredients, God tier ores, God tier blueprints, and other treasures. In terms of insight defection, Zhou Zhou's clones had used the 2 insight defection skills of Land of Earth, a Minister of the King, and Son of Destiny to instigate a total of 1 Guy Unit 5,123 capital units soldier, 11,523,982,913 low-tier deity level god spirits, 5,023,912 mid-tier deity level god spirits, 3,023,712,387 high-tier deity level god spirits, 1,528,273 true gods, 162,381 master gods, and 35 supreme gods. In addition, the Lords of the Star Alliance had also insight defection 2,302 capital units soldiers, more than 12,415,000,000 god spirits, more than 7 million true god tiers, and 1,281 Lord gods. In the end, in terms of the advancement of god spirits, there were a total of 112,329,884,328 legendary tier advanced grade soldiers who had been promoted to low tier deity level elementary grade god spirits. There were also 2,418,237 high tier deity level advanced grade god spirits who had advanced to true god tier elementary grade god spirits. Another 6,211 top-notch true gods of the human race and 32,937 top-notch true gods of the people of foreign races felt their master god tier bottleneck and applied to enter the reincarnation sacred palace to cultivate in seclusion in an attempt to break through to the master god tier realm. Moreover, there were 10 High Lord advance grade God spirits who had sensed the bottleneck in their advancement and were also preparing to enter the Reincarnation Sacred Palace today to advance to a Grade 1 Supreme God. Zhou Zhou's original military strength was 22 Guy units 8,022 capital units 2,387, 256, 523, 743, 888 soldiers, 800,448,029,218 God spirits, 14,488,119,388 true God tiers, 294,802 master gods and 196 supreme gods, and 1 quasi-supreme willpower realm expert. Now, with the addition of these divine spirit experts who had instigated the insight defection and the 5 supreme gods and 15 master gods recruited from the chaotic mystic realm, the military strength under him had reached 1 Guy unit 1010 capital units 731, 283, 1272, 978 soldiers, 248,573,699,994 God spirits, 7,357,117,439 true gods, 82,997 master gods, and 53 supreme gods. After reading it, a smile appeared on Zhou Zhou's face. Even though there was no ultimate void battleground. However, with these 4 battlefields, the speed at which his soldiers advanced didn't decrease. Instead, it increased. Especially at the Master God tier, Supreme God and Quasi-Supreme Willpower Realm experts, there was even more breakthrough progress. The number of Master God tier exceeded 300,000. The number of Supreme Gods exceeded 200. Even the number of Quasi-Supreme Willpower elites had increased from 1 to 6. The most important reason for the explosive increase in the number of experts at these 3 levels was the location of Tianjun's corpse. That place was indeed a treasure land suitable for Master God tier and Supreme Gods to train. Most of the Master God tiers under him who were about to break through to the Supreme God level came from Tianjun's corpse. In the future, I'll have to send more Master God tier and Supreme God level experts to Tianjun's corpse. In this way, with the special training environment of Tianjun's corpse, I will definitely be able to obtain more new Supreme Gods. Zhou Zhou thought to himself. In addition to the above war summary, in terms of purchasing Chaos Divine treasures in the Chaos Sea, the management of the Chaos Sea today bought 220 units of Chaos Divine treasures from the Divine Kingdom Lord factions that were collecting Chaos Divine treasures in the Time Ruins. He originally had 2,890 units of Chaos Divine treasures. Now, with these 220 units of Chaos Divine treasures and the 3,588 units of Chaos Divine treasures obtained from other battlefields, it added up to 6,698 units of Chaos Divine treasures. Advancing to a Grade 1 Supreme God territory required 10,000 units of Chaos Divine treasures. He had already gathered 2/3 of it. Zhou Zhou was still very satisfied. With Tianjun's corpse as a new source of Chaos Divine treasures, the collection of Chaos Divine treasures was much faster than before. Even if I can't find a single unit of Chaos Divine treasure in the Ultimate Void Battleground, I'm not worried anymore. With Tianjun's corpse, I don't need the Chaos Divine treasure from the Ultimate Void Battleground anymore. A smile appeared on Zhou Zhou's face. However, after some thought, he still contacted Lord of 10,000 Evils. It wasn't that he cared about the Chaos Divine treasure. He simply wanted to know how the Ultimate Void battlefield was doing. Soon, his personal terminal projected a virtual projection of Lord of 10,000 Evils. Big Brother. The Lord of 10,000 Evils was very excited that his big brother could take the initiative to contact him. Brother Demon Lord, how are things on your side? As Zhou Zhou asked this question, he was also paying attention to the background behind Lord of 10,000 Evils. Then, he raised his brows slightly. This was because he had seen many god spirits fighting. All the god spirits from the lesser gods to the powerhouses of the Supreme Willpower Realm were fighting a bloody battle without exception. Both sides seemed to have gone crazy, causing each other to die. They did not even pay attention to their own defense. Apart from that, Zhou Zhou could also tell that the soldiers on the Supreme Will's side seemed to have a huge advantage. Therefore, even though they were fighting with all their might, their desperation revealed a sense of calmness. As for the Ultimate Void race, they were really fighting with their lives on the line. They killed 1,000 enemies and suffered 800 losses. It was a crazy battle between trapped beasts. What is going on? He had also fought with the Ultimate Void race many times. Wasn't this how the Ultimate Void race fought? From the looks of the battlefield behind you, did something happen to the Ultimate Void clan? It looks like they're fighting crazily. Zhou Zhou asked. Big brother's right. Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled and said, the ultimate void race has indeed encountered a major event like the collapse of the sky. That's why they fought so recklessly. Because their king the Void Emperor has already fallen. Killed by our Lord Supreme Will. When Lord of 10,000 Evils said this, he immediately straightened his back, feeling rather honored. Then, he looked at Zhou Zhou's shocked expression and continued smugly, after killing the Void Emperor, the Supreme will completely shut off the Ultimate Void Battleground and ordered us to eliminate all the Ultimate Void races in the Ultimate Void Battleground. After this battle, there's a high chance that the Ultimate Void clan will be exterminated. The remaining members of the Ultimate Void clan wandering in the Ultimate Void Great Cosmos will not be able to make a name for themselves. Before long, they will be completely wiped out by the other multiverse forces in the Ultimate Void Great Cosmos. Zhou Zhou was shocked the entire time. The Void Emperor was actually destroyed by the Supreme Will? How long has it been? Was the Void Emperor that invulnerable to attacks? He was in existence with the same will after all. How did he die in just a day? Or could it be that the Supreme Will was that strong? So strong that there was a gap in strength between him and the other willpower powerhouses? Zhou Zhou fell into deep thought. He did not question the Lord of 10,000 Evils' words. Since he said that the Supreme Will had killed the Void Emperor must have really died. It couldn't be fake. I'll make a trip to the Ultimate Void Battleground. Zhou Zhou blurted out. He was stunned after saying that. Why did he suddenly say such a thing? Chapter 1703, Grade 3 Supreme God Realm. 1. Big brother, are you coming to the Ultimate Void Battleground? The Lord of 10,000 Evils' eyes lit up when he heard this. He immediately smiled and said, then I'll hold a banquet tomorrow and let us brothers have a good gathering. Zhou Zhou's expression did not change on the surface, but his heart was already in turmoil. He did not reply to Lord of 10,000 Evils at all. There was only one thought in his mind. Why did I say this out of the blue? It was as if his instincts were driving him to say this. Weird. What a strange feeling. This was the first time Zhou Zhou had experienced such a thing. He recalled the various bloodline inheritances in his mind with a slightly gloomy expression, wanting to find out the reason for this inexplicable behavior. In the end, he discovered that there were many reasons for such behavior. For example, charm type abilities, fate type abilities, control type abilities, curse type abilities. Among all kinds of abilities, there were many methods to control life forms to say something. But he was a grade 2 supreme god. Moreover, it was a supreme god whose combat power was comparable to a top-notch quasi-supreme willpower realm expert. Even if a true supreme willpower realm expert came before, he also had the ability to save his life. An existence at his level no longer had any means at the same level that could forcefully control he to do what he had just done. Unless there was a supreme willpower expert or even a willpower expert secretly taking action. However, in the Supreme Great Cosmos, who would dare to tamper with the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army under the eyes of the Supreme Will? Who could do such a thing? Did they really think that the Supreme Will was a pushover? He was someone who could kill a Void Emperor as easily as killing a chicken. Even the Crimson Overlord might not be able to do that. What the hell is going on? Zhou Zhou's heart sank. Dude, what's up? The Lord of 10,000 Evils finally faintly realized that his big brother's mood was not quite right and asked worriedly. It's okay. I just thought of something. Zhou Zhou came back to his senses and said to the Lord of 10,000 Evils. The Lord of 10,000 Evils nodded. He could tell that he was hiding something from him. However, since he didn't want to tell him, he couldn't ask further. Furthermore, he believed that with his brother's abilities, since he didn't ask for help, there was a high chance that he could resolve it on his own. At this moment, a new idea appeared in Zhou Zhou's mind. Since he had just bafflingly mentioned that he would personally make a trip to the Ultimate Void battlefield. In that case, he might as well make a trip there and see what was going on there that would make him say this uncontrollably. Of course, he would not let his main body go. Instead, he would send a clone to the Ultimate Void battleground to see what was going on. Lord Supreme Will, are you still in the Ultimate Void battleground? Zhou Zhou suddenly asked. The main body is no longer here. The Lord of 10,000 Evils said. However, Lord Supreme Will left a clone to supervise the situation here. That was because the Void Emperor had just been killed by the Supreme Will. The Supreme Will was also afraid that after he left, the ultimate void race would suddenly use some transcendent level trump card to destroy the battlefield, so he left this clone behind. Zhou Zhou nodded. He heaved another sigh of relief. Since the Supreme Will had left a clone behind, he would be even more daring to send a clone to the ultimate void battlefield. There shouldn't be any accidents on this trip with the Supreme Will's clone here. Since Big Brother is coming tomorrow, I'll collect the ultimate void crystals and chaos divine treasures in the sacred zone today. When Big Brother comes tomorrow, I'll give them to you directly. The Lord of 10,000 Evils said. Okay. Zhou Zhou nodded. Then, Zhou Zhou chatted with the Lord of 10,000 Evils for a while before hanging up. Then, Zhou Zhou returned to the Reincarnation Sacred Palace and continued cultivating. The next day, Zhou Zhou slowly opened his eyes. He felt the surging divine power in his body and the increasingly refined divine spark, and a smile appeared on his face. Grade 3 Supreme God Realm. He felt the surging divine power in his body and the increasingly refined divine spark, and a smile appeared on his face. Such progress could be said to be terrifying. Then, with the thought, he brought up the various law skills he had learned after advancing to the Grade 3 Supreme God Realm. The first was the King that was used the most frequently. Law skill name, King. Law skill quality, Grade 3 Supreme God Realm. Introduction: as a Grade 2 Supreme God on the Lord's Law path, you can mark 100% of the territorial subjects and control everything they have, including appearance, bloodline, skills, weapons, law skills, and even illusory fate. When you control everything the marked subject has, the subject doesn't have to suffer any negative effects. Zhou Zhou nodded in satisfaction after reading it. The multiplier increased from 10 to 20 times. It directly doubled. This also meant that his strength had doubled again. His strength had already reached a level infinitely close to the Supreme Will realm. He was twice as strong as before. Even though he still couldn't reach the level of unmatched will, he was even closer. Beating up 100 quasi-supreme willpower realm experts was child's play with his current strength after using King. Then, he looked at the second law skill Myriad Method Star Palm. Chapter 1704, Grade 3 Supreme God Realm. 2. The improvement of the Myriad Method Star Palm was the same as before. It was purely an increase in power. Its power had also increased by 10 times. Zhou Zhou even had the thought of exchanging blows with a true Supreme Willpower Realm expert coupled with King whose power had also increased. As for the third law skill Under the Heavens, everything is the King's land. Its domain strength has also increased again. Currently, it could already weaken the effect of 1/10 of the will domain of a Supreme Will Realm existence. As for domains below the Supreme Will Realm, there was naturally no need to mention them. It was a complete suppression. In addition, the law skill All the land in the world belongs to the King could establish 200 temporary/permanent exclusive territories at the boundless universe level in the law domain when he was a Grade 2 Supreme God. The number had risen to 500. Finally, the Grade 2 Supreme God All the land in the world belongs to the King could forcefully make 200 boundless universes his territory every day. The number had also risen to 500. The improvement of this ability could undoubtedly greatly increase the speed and efficiency of his Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's expansion of its territory every day. As for the coast of Earth, could it be that the effect of Wang Chen's law skill was to instantly change the thoughts and wills of the life forms in the domain by consuming half of the supreme divine power in their bodies after casting the domain, turning into subjects loyal to them? Previously, when it was a Grade 2 Supreme God law skill, it could only incite Grade 2 Supreme Gods and subjects below. Now, he could instigate the incite defection subjects below Grade 3 Supreme God Realm and below. Finally, there was the fifth law skill the 95 Supreme King. Law skill name, 95 Supreme King. Law skill quality, Grade 3 Supreme God Realm. Introduction to Nomological Skills. You are standing at the peak of all lords. You are the King of Lords, the Absolute Supreme. When you face other lords and they are enemies with you, all the abilities that they use against you will be weakened by 30%. There is a 30% chance that they will be ineffective. Your subject's combat strength has increased by 300% when they fight with you. Other lords will have a natural sense of reverence and even submission when facing you. There is a certain chance that the other party will agree to your opinions and thoughts. Those who are your enemies will feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. Only those with extremely strong willpower will be immune to this fear. You can transform into the 95 Supreme King Dragon God. Your body is invincible and indestructible. Unless all the soldiers under you die or the difference in strength between you and the other party is so great that it can't be made up for, you will definitely not die. When you transform into the 95 Supreme King Dragon God and appear on the battlefield, you will randomly give your soldiers the supreme blessing to strengthen their various abilities. Zhou Zhou nodded in satisfaction after reading it. The effects of the 95 Supreme King's nomological skills had also doubled. The most obvious improvement was that this law skill doubled the combat strength of the subjects under him. Not bad, not bad. His 5 law skills did not disappoint him. Then, he looked at his newly upgraded Supreme Unique Lord Talent. Lord Talent, Paramita Sacred Boat, Supreme Unique. Paramita Sacred Boat, your territory has a general purpose race divine artifact, the Paramita Sacred Boat. The Paramita Sacred Boat was born at the birth of the Law of Life. Its purpose of existence was to bring all the living beings of the worlds away from the world that was about to be destroyed when they were in danger of being destroyed and head to the new shore of life. Specific Lord Talent Effect 1 Paramita's Gratitude. The Lord who owns the Paramita Sacred Boat and the subjects under his command will have 2 unlimited chances to revive after death every day. Specific Lord Talent Effect 2 Indestructible by myriad tribulations. The lords and subjects under the control of the Paramita Sacred Boat will have an indestructible moment of 1 second per day. Any calamity, even a supreme willpower expert, will not be able to kill a living being in the indestructible state. Specific Lord Talent Effect 3 Longevity Prolongation. The life essence of the Lord and the subjects under him who own the Paramita Sacred Boat has been greatly improved. Not only is he healthy, strong, and powerful, but his recovery ability has also greatly increased. His mental recovery ability has greatly increased, his reaction speed has greatly increased, his reproduction ability has greatly increased, life form lifespan has greatly increased, and so on. Specific Lord Talent Effect 4 Paramita Journey. The Paramita Sacred Boat can ignore any calamity and will never be damaged. The living beings inside the Paramita Sacred Boat can also resist all calamities below the Supreme God level in the final will calamity. Specific Lord Talent Effect 5 Undying Altar. By spending a certain amount of mist cores, divine crystals, faith divine crystals, and other valuable currencies, you can revive all life forms below the Supreme God level. After reading it, Zhou Zhou nodded in satisfaction. As the mythical tier Unique Lord Talent, the Supreme Unique Lord Talent of the Life Arc did not disappoint him. The effects of its Lord Talent in all aspects had greatly increased. Especially when it comes to resurrection. The kindness of the Otherworld Heavenly King allowed him and his subjects to have 2 unlimited opportunities to revive after death every day. The last effect, the Undying Altar, could revive all life forms below the Supreme God level by spending a certain amount of mist cores, divine crystals, faith divine crystals, and other valuable currencies. From then on, if he wanted to revive the Supreme God, he would no longer need to seek help from the Reincarnation Will. Even though the Reincarnation Will was considered one of them, when it came to others, there was no one who had the ability to deal with him. In addition, Talent Effect 2 Immortality, Talent Effect 3 Longevity, Talent Effect 4 each of them had their own uses during the journey to the Nirvana realm. Almost none of the talent effects were useless or overlapped with the talent abilities that he had mastered. Zhou Zhou was very satisfied. Then, he closed the Lord Talent Information Interface and stood up to leave the Reincarnation Sacred Palace. He came to Mu Gu's residence. After drinking tea with Mu Gu for a while, a golden stream of light flew out of the Scarlet Broodmother and landed on the ground, revealing Wu Xian's figure. "Greetings, Your Majesty," Wu Xian said respectfully. Then, he took out 3 rings and handed them to Zhou Zhou. "These are my gains from the Scarlet Broodmother. Please take a look, Your Majesty." Zhou Zhou took it and checked it. After confirming that there were no problems, he handed the class change certificate to Wu Xian and asked him to find a reserve recruit to change his class to Supreme God Realm Soldier and Supreme Holy Mage God. As for Zhou Zhou, he left Mu Gu's residence and flew out of the Divine Kingdom world, arriving at the Gate of Summoning. Then, he called over a Master God Tier Advance Grade Eternal Battleship as usual. Then, he threw all 2 Guy unit recruitment books into the Gate of Summoning. Finally, he spent 100 Master God Tier Advance Grade Divine Crystals to recruit they in one go and arranged for they to be on this Eternal Battleship. Then, he spent another 100 Master God Tier Advance Grade Divine Crystals to summon 66,666,600 pure-blooded dragons. They were also placed on another Eternal Mothership. Then, Zhou Zhou spent another 100 Master God Tier Advance Grade Divine Crystals to summon today's subject. This time, he summoned more than 27.7 billion subjects. He summoned more than 6.6 billion subjects than usual. Then, he got his subordinates to arrange the whereabouts of these new soldiers and new subjects before heading to the Jade Capital Immortal Mountain alone. After spending 1000 low-tier deity-level elementary grade divine crystals, he summoned 100 capital units heavenly soldiers, heavenly generals, and heavenly venerates. At this point, all the soldier types for today had been recruited and changed. Right at that moment. Swish, 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 swish. A total of 39,148 light pillars of various laws soared into the sky from the direction of the Reincarnation Sacred Palace. It was the advancement phenomenon of the 39,148 new Master God tiers of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. Shortly after, another 10 completely different starry sky phenomena appeared in the sky filled with stars. These 10 abnormal phenomena were all different. Each of them emitted an extremely terrifying might. It was the advancement phenomenon of the 10 newly advanced Supreme Gods. Chapter 1705, Total Military Force. Bodhi Supreme's Method. 1. All the God spirits in the myriad worlds saw the advancement phenomenon of the 10 Supreme Gods. Compared to them, the advancement phenomenon of nearly 40,000 Master Gods seemed a little ordinary. Even though Master Gods were also top-notch experts, they were actually not rare. As experts one level higher than Master God tier, the number of Supreme Gods was limited. There were only 10,000 Supreme Gods in the entire Supreme Great Cosmos. 10 Supreme Gods were born in one day. Other than the Supreme Will and the Crimson Overlord personally creating the Supreme God, such a situation had never happened in other historical periods. The Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom had really set a record this time. After the initial shock, the experts of the Myriad Races Combat Channel and the Myriad Races Lord Channel immediately began to discuss this matter crazily. 10 Supreme Gods were born at the same time. As a veteran Supreme God, I can only say that I'm inexperienced. I've never heard or seen anything like it. I've really learned something this time. The Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom is awesome. The Common People's Regal is awesome. Common People's Regal is too powerful. He relied on his own strength to increase the peak combat strength of the Supreme Great Cosmos by 0.01%. Exaggerated. The Supreme Great Cosmos is really blessed to have a lord like Common People's Regal. Isn't that too much? Isn't it just 10 Grade 1 Supreme Gods? Overdoing it? Let me put it this way. The things that you've said are overdoing it. Even God King Heaven Punishment, Spring and Autumn Dharma Lord, and Lord of 10,000 Evils, the 3 Supreme Lord Reserves, have never done it. Is they unwilling to do it? They can't do it. As far as I know, 1,000,000 years ago, the Spring and Autumn Dharma Lord used the power of the River of Time to create 3 Supreme God subordinates in a day. However, I heard that after that incident, the Spring and Autumn Dharma Lord seemed to have suffered some taboo backlash from the River of Time. From then on, the Spring and Autumn Dharma Lord no longer used the River of Time to forcefully create the Supreme God. The Common People's Regal must have a unique method to create top-notch experts. If the Common People's Regal contributes his method to create experts, wouldn't our Supreme Great Cosmos be able to take off quickly? I strongly suggest that the Common People's Regal contributes his method to nurture experts. If the Common People's Regal isn't selfish, he must think that there's nothing wrong with what I said, right? Where did this idiot come from? How can he say such shameless words? Why don't you contribute your cultivation resources and let more cultivators break through in our Supreme Great Cosmos? You have evil intentions and want to disgust our Common People's Regal, Your Excellency, right? I also suggest that we investigate this guy immediately. I suspect that he has malicious intentions towards our Supreme Great Cosmos. He might be a spy planted in our Supreme Great Cosmos by the Illusionist clan or the Ultimate Void clan. Heh, everyone, don't worry. I've already found the Holy Lord of Divination and got he to divine this fellow's location. After confirming the location, I'll immediately bring my good friend to look for him. I've already contacted the Demon God Department of the Sun Divine Court. It won't be long before we find that guy. When the time comes, we'll publicly execute him. Does he really think that the channel is a lawless place? He dares to say anything. You guys are too much. Do you have to do this? When you find a place, call me. I'm good at long-distance fishing. Doghead. The deities discussed animatedly. Many god spirits saw the farces in these discussions. On one hand, they lamented that there were all kinds of birds in the forest. On the other hand, they were secretly shocked by the prestige of the Common People's Regal. This prestige came not only from the fact that the Common People's Regal was the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army, but also from the fact that the Common People's Regal had nurtured many supreme gods. He had status, strength, and powerful subordinates. He also had a good reputation in the myriad worlds. Many merits were gathered on Common People's Regal alone. This made his prestige among the god spirits almost unparalleled. This could be seen from the fact that god spirits bad-mouthed him or harbored ill intentions towards the Common People's Regal and immediately attracted other god spirits to attack him together. God King Heaven Punishment and Dharma Lord Spring and Autumn had such prestige in the past. However, it was a famous scene that only happened after he became a Supreme Lord Reserve Army for a long time. And now, the Common People's Regal had just become the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army and already had such prestige. It was unbelievable. In the high-level Divine Kingdom channel, the subjects of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom were also discussing the birth of 10 new supreme gods in the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. However, compared to the gods of the outside world, the subjects of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom were much calmer. They had long been used to His Majesty's various miraculous achievements. Therefore, even though they also felt honored that the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom had given birth to 10 supreme gods, on the surface, everyone was all smiles, as if this was a daily occurrence. Of course, only they knew how excited they were. The advancement phenomena dissipated, 39,148 light pillars of various laws and 10 especially huge light pillars of laws soared into the sky from the reincarnation sacred palace after all. Then, they flew towards Zhou Zhou and quickly landed in front of him. It was the newly promoted Master God and the newly promoted Supreme God. They immediately knelt down and thanked Zhou Zhou respectfully after they arrived. Chapter 1706, Total Military Force. Bodhi Supreme's Method. 2. Zhou Zhou waved his hand and smiled as he spoke to them for a while. Then, he gave them a set of divine artifacts that suited them. Then, he looked at the 10 new Master God tiers. When he saw that among the 10 newly advanced Master Gods were the original Master God tier, Machina Master God, Wisdom Master God, and De Huang, the 4 newly advanced Supreme Gods, he nodded inwardly. That's it. 9 of the 10 Master God tiers who had joined the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom had finally become Supreme Gods. This time, he had fulfilled his promise to them. The only one left was the chaotic God race patriarch, the Heaven Curse Beast. That fellow had long been suppressed by the Supreme Will, so Zhou Zhou naturally did not need to care about it. Congratulations! Zhou Zhou said with a smile to the original Master God tier and the other 10 former Master Gods. The original Master God tier and the other 4 newly promoted Supreme Gods, as well as the Goddess of Life and the other Supreme Gods who had advanced earlier, all stood up and thanked Zhou Zhou respectfully. Your Majesty, all of our achievements today are thanks to Your Majesty. Please accept another bow from us. This favor will never be repaid. We will definitely devote our lives to the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. They said in unison. Zhou Zhou smiled and nodded. Then, he opened their information panel and found that their loyalty had indeed all become Holy Spirit tier believers. Zhou Zhou nodded in satisfaction. This kind of loyal, capable, eloquent, and grateful subordinate was likable. Then, he chatted with they for a while longer before asking they to look for Zhang Yuankai to collect their duties and worshipped God Spirit salaries. Zhou Fai then calculated the strength of his main combat army. His original military strength was 24 Gai units 5,447 capital units 2,376, 643, 712, 912, 387 soldiers, 832,434,636,889 god spirits, 16,001,037 true gods, 312,464 supremacy gods, 236 supreme gods, and 6 quasi-supreme willpower realm. Including the 20 Gai unit recruits who were recruited and changed jobs today, there were 66,666,660,000 pure-blooded dragons, 100 capital units heavenly soldiers, 16,610 newly advanced master gods, and 6 newly advanced supreme gods. The troops under him had already reached 44 Gai units, 5,547 capital units, 2,376, 709, 712, 912, 387 soldiers, 8,331,636,889 god spirits, 22.6 trillion 7,037 true gods, 351,612 supremacy gods, 246 supreme gods, and 6 quasi-supreme willpower realm. Zhou Zhou nodded slightly after reading it. Then, he sensed the lower limit of the potential of the Blazing Sun God race's citizens. There were still no changes to the mid-tier deity level advance grade. However, he originally needed 45,813 newly advanced Master God tiers to advance the Blazing Sun God race to the lower limit of the high-tier deity level elementary grade. Now that he had these new Master God tiers today, he needed 39,602 new Master God tiers to advance to the lower limit of the high-tier deity level elementary grade. The speed at which the Blazing Sun God race's potential increased began to slow down. However, Zhou Zhou was not in a hurry. How long had he been developing? What was he so anxious about? Furthermore, he knew very well. True God tiers, Master God tiers, and Supreme Gods under him would increase in the future as he could now recruit 20 Guy unit epic tier advance grade soldiers every day, the number of God spirits. This was the huge effect of having a large base. Therefore, his speed of raising the lower limit of his potential had slowed down. However, it's only temporary. As he continued to develop, the speed and number of God spirits born under him would become more and more terrifying. It was not impossible to raise the lower limit of the Blazing Sun God race's potential to the high-tier deity level. It was not impossible to raise it to the true God tier or even the Master God tier level. At the same time, Joe Marshall had already brought Thanatos, Nazario, and 10,000 Master God tier advance grade God spirits to the Chaos Sea. They quickly found the space-time chaotic divine demon and discovered that there were a total of 415 chaotic divine demons beside the 4 chaotic divine demons. Joe Marshall's eyes lit up. This time, the number of Chaos Fiend Celestials that they brought over was nearly twice as many as the last time. He immediately brought the God spirits to them. After a few simple words, he gave the space-time chaotic divine demon 1,660 Master God tier divine artifacts. He then wiped out the 415 chaotic divine demons with a single palm strike. After extracting the loots, he obtained a total of 1,700 chaos divine treasures. Then, they went to the ruins of the Chaos of Death and obtained another 170 units of chaos divine treasures. At this point, the number of chaos divine treasures in his hands had already reached 8,568 units. A smile appeared on Joe Marshall's face. Advancing to Grade 1 Supreme God territory required 10,000 units of Chaos Divine Treasures. Now he was only short of 1,000 units. It seemed that after he sent his clone to take the Chaos Divine Treasure from Lord of 10,000 Evils, he would have gathered all the Chaos Divine Treasures. However, there was no joy on Joe Marshall's face. Chaos Divine Treasures could be obtained through many channels, so it was not difficult to resolve them. What was difficult to resolve now was the ultimate Void Crystal and the most ridiculous requirement to upgrade a Grade 1 Supreme God territory to conquer 10 beginner grade Master God tier kingdoms. That was 10 beginner grade Master God tier kingdoms. Moreover, it could not overlap with the 4 beginner grade Master God tier kingdoms needed to upgrade a high-level Master God tier kingdom. In other words, if he wanted to upgrade his territory to a Grade 1 Supreme God level territory and then upgrade the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom to a beginner grade Master God tier kingdom, he still needed to conquer a total of 12 beginner-grade Master God tier kingdoms. This was even counting Linger's beginner-grade Spiritual Medicine Master God tier kingdom and O's Chaos beginner-grade Master God tier kingdom. Otherwise, he would need to conquer 14 beginner-grade Master God tier kingdoms. Difficult. At this rate, the speed at which he upgraded his territory would greatly decrease. What to do? Zhou Zhou thought about this question again. He had no choice but to do so. He was about to meet the requirements of the Chaos Divine Treasure after all. Of the remaining conditions, he had the confidence to resolve the 10 units of Ultimate Void Crystals. This way, the only remaining condition was to conquer the 10 beginner-grade Master God tier kingdoms. Under such circumstances, he naturally wanted to complete all the advancement conditions as soon as possible to upgrade his territory. However, after thinking for a long time, he still couldn't think of a good solution. The Supreme Great Cosmos and the Crimson Great Cosmos were developing at such a speed. What could he do? He couldn't expect every lord to be as abnormal as he and be able to quickly upgrade his territory to the level of a beginner-grade Master God tier kingdom. At this thought, Joe Marshall realized something. That was, he had encountered the same problem as before. The problem was that his competitors could no longer keep up with his pace of development. As a result, when he wanted to turn around and harvest them, they realized that these crops were not even worth harvesting. Joe Marshall scratched his head with a helpless expression. That's probably the only downside of going too fast. Right at that moment, A light suddenly appeared in his mind. Oh, yeah. Why don't you ask Bodhi Supreme what to do? If you want to do it, do it. He immediately took out the Bodhi Supreme. Yo! As soon as Bodhi Supreme came out, he teased, "Are common people's regal, the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army? No, the Supreme Lord's 3rd Reserve Army, why do you have the time to look for me? It's been a long time since you've asked me questions." The corners of Zhou Marshall's mouth twitched. However, in the past few days, his main body had indeed not asked the Bodhi Supreme many questions. The main reason was that his main body had already reached a high enough level. Most of the questions in the myriad worlds could be answered by the main body with his own knowledge and the bloodline inheritance in his mind. He did not need the Bodhi Supreme's help at all. Therefore, the Bodhi Supreme rarely appeared in front of the main body and clones during this period of time. He ignored Bodhi Supreme's teasing and directly asked, "Bodhi Supreme, I have a question. It's about the beginner grade Master God tier kingdom, right?" Bodhi Supreme said lazily. "That's right." Zhou Marshall nodded. Currently, the Lord factions of the Supreme Great Cosmos and the Crimson Great Cosmos are developing too slowly. They can no longer satisfy my need to advance my territory. What do I do now? Tisk Bodhi Supreme smiled and said, "This is also a kind of blissful distress. A chance to answer a common question, then, as a price. A chance to answer a normal question? So cheap." Zhou Marshall said in surprise. "It wasn't a problem in the first place. You were just blinded." Bodhi Supreme said lazily, "I'm not a profiteer. I only ask for a price based on the difficulty of the problem." Blinded. Zhou Marshall fell into deep thought and asked curiously, "Then what is the solution? To the ultimate void great cosmos?" Bodhi Supreme looked at Zhou Marshall as if he was looking at a fool. "Don't tell me you think that in the entire ultimate void great cosmos, only our universe walks the path of a lord. In the entire ultimate void great cosmos, there are many great cosmos that walk the path of a lord. Some of the great cosmoses in them even have lords with transcendent wills. You lack a beginner grade Master God tier kingdom. Then conquer these universes." Chapter 1707, The Existence of the Third Illusionary Legendary Tier Sage Seal. 1. The words woke him up from his dream. That's right. Why didn't he think of going to the ultimate void great cosmos to find another great cosmos that followed the path of a lord and complete the promotion goal of his territory by conquering the high-level territories of theirs? A blind spot. It's a blind spot. Zhou Marshall muttered to himself before an excited expression appeared on his face. If this path was smooth, forget about upgrading his territory to the grade 1 Supreme God's territory, he would also upgrade his divine kingdom to the level of a high-level Master God tier kingdom. Even if it was a Supreme God level or even a Supreme Willpower level country, he had a chance of reaching it. Moreover, it was the kind that he did not have to worry about spending too much time. I've stayed in the Supreme Great Cosmos for too long, so my horizons are limited to the Supreme Great Cosmos. At most, I can expand the Crimson Great Cosmos. So much so that he didn't even think about going to other universes to find a target. Zhou Marshall sighed inwardly. However, it was precisely because he knew this reason that he did not blame his main body, Zhou Zhou. He only sighed. It was indeed better for people to go out more. If they did not broaden their horizons, even if the answer was right in front of them, they would be too narrow-minded and unable to see the full answer. Fortunately, he had the brain of the Bodhi Supreme in his hands. Otherwise, he would probably be confused by this difficult problem for a long time. If you encounter any problems in the future, you still have to ask the Bodhi Supreme more. Zhou Marshall reminded himself and his main body. Then, he began to think again. Even though the way to quickly advance territories and divine kingdoms was to find other alternate universes that had the path of other lords in the ultimate void great cosmos and complete the goal he needed by conquering the territories in them. But after thinking about it carefully, there were still a few difficulties that needed to be resolved to achieve this. If they did not resolve them, not to mention completing the goal, they might even lose themselves. First of all, the first problem was naturally the question of which great cosmos to conquer. The ultimate void great cosmos was boundless. It was truly a great cosmos with no boundaries. The great cosmos within it was almost endless because of this. Finding a suitable great cosmos for him to conquer from these great cosmoses was no different from finding a needle in a haystack. Fortunately, he had the Bodhi Supreme and there was a high chance that he could resolve this. There was a solution to this problem. Then, it was time for the second problem. That was how to integrate into other great cosmos and participate in the Lord contest with a suitable identity to quickly complete the promotion resources he needed. At the same time, he could not expose his identity. Otherwise, once a cosmic spy like him was discovered, the supreme willpower experts and even willpower experts of the enemy great cosmos would definitely personally deal with him after knowing that an outsider like him had actually plundered the resources of their great cosmos. Even though Zhou Wu knew that his main body and many avatars already had a certain level of ability to protect themselves even in the face of a supreme will realm, that was just self-preservation. If a supreme will realm expert used his full strength, there was a high chance that his avatar, which was as strong as him, would still die on the spot. It was even to the extent that with the unique and strange methods of the other world's great cosmos, it might affect him. Zhou Zhou and his many clones didn't dare bet that such a thing wouldn't happen. Therefore, before they had to prepare a way to hide their identities entered other universes. He did not ask Bodhi Supreme. Instead, he thought about it first. He soon thought of a solution. This method was still very close and was in the hands of the main body. Isn't the best way to hide your identity the reality cube that the main body currently controls? The effect of the reality cube's obscure identity can even be hidden from the Crimson Overlord. The Void Emperor holds the reality cube and even dares to ignore the importance and protection of the Supreme Will to directly send a Supreme Will realm expert to assassinate him. Its ability to hide its identity and change reality information can definitely be considered top-notch. It shouldn't be a problem for it to hide the identity of the clone. Zhou Marshall thought. This matter would definitely be done by his clone, so there was nothing wrong with his idea with his main body's habit of being lazy. As for why the Supreme Will and the Crimson Overlord were used as examples, it was because even in the ultimate void great cosmos, other than the legendary Eternal Realm experts, the Supreme Will and the Crimson Overlord's strength could definitely be considered top-notch experts among the willpower experts. This could be seen from how the Supreme Will easily killed the patriarch of the ultimate void race, the Void Emperor. The ultimate void race had an overlord-like status in the ultimate void cosmos. Even he was easily destroyed by the Supreme Will. The Supreme Will and the Crimson Overlord's strength could be said to be invincible at the same level. The reality cube could even hide from them. In other universes, it was most likely not a problem to hide the true identity of the main body's clone. He left his thoughts to his main body and did not think too much about it. He opened the warp gate of the Shadow World and met up with the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom army led by Zhou Wen to continue attacking the other territories on the High Continent. The Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom now occupied 2/5 of the entire High Continent. Chapter 1708, The Existence of the Third Illusionary Legendary Tier Sage Seal. 2. According to the plans of the main body and clones, they planned to unify the entire High Continent in at most 3 days and become the true master of the High Continent. The High Continent was originally a reward given by the Supreme Will to him, the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army. It was comparable to the dusk battlefield of the God King Heaven Punishment, the River of Time of the Spring and Autumn Dharma Lord, and the ultimate void battlefield of the Lord of 10,000 Evils. He didn't want to delay here for too long, lest the Supreme Will feel that his strength had decreased. At the same time, in the common people's temple of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom, Zhou Zhou was closing his eyes and activating the doppelganger technique. The next second, he felt half of the origin power in his body quickly flowed out of his heart and gathered in his hand, forming a ball of 9-colored origin power. Then, the ball of light slowly condensed into a palm-sized Zhou Zhou. He jumped out of Zhou Zhou's hand. As he landed on the ground, he rapidly grew in size. By the time he landed on the ground he was already the size of Zhou Zhou. Zhou 16 greets the main body. Zhou 16 smiled. I haven't named you yet, but you've named yourself. Zhou Zhou chuckled. With your terrible naming skills, what else could you have given it other than Zhou 16? I just helped you say it in advance. Zhou 16 pursed his lips. Zhou Zhou was speechless, but he didn't dwell on it. Go to the ultimate void battleground for me today. Zhou Zhou said, you have to be more careful. I have a feeling that you will encounter other gains on this trip. I understand. Zhou 16 nodded. The main body's various premonitions had been verified countless times, so he had no choice but to believe it. Then you go. Zhou Zhou waved his hand. Zhou 16 was about to leave when he suddenly heard Zhou Zhou say, wait. What's up? Zhou 16 was taken aback as he turned to look at him. Zhou Zhou's eyes lit up when he sensed Zhou Marshall's message. That's right. Why didn't he think of conquering their high-level lord country in the other universes of the ultimate void great cosmos to complete his goal of advancement? It was really as the Bodhi Supreme had said. He had stayed in the high continent for so long that he had not thought of it even though the answer was clearly right in front of him. He could not help but feel a little vexed. If he had thought of this earlier, he might have already become a high-level Divine Kingdom Lord faction 5 to 6 days ago. Sure enough, the old saying was right. People don't make money beyond their knowledge. Never mind. Don't worry about it. It's not too late to think about it. Zhou Zhou didn't mind. He turned to the curious Zhou 16 and said, "After you return from the ultimate void battleground today, come and see me immediately. I have another task for you." Okay. Zhou 16 nodded happily and asked, "Are you all right now? Come on, let's go. You don't look like you want to stay." Zhou Zhou pretended to wave his hand in disdain. Zhou 16 shrugged and left with an indifferent expression. Zhou Zhou looked at Zhou 16 and said to himself with a smile, "Let this fellow explore other alternate universes. It's an alternate universe. They're all undeveloped." His heart was burning. Zhou Zhou had a premonition. After his avatar developed the alternate universe, his territory's upgrade speed would definitely increase like a rocket. On the other side, after Zhou 16 left the Divine Kingdom, he directly opened a warp gate and descended from the Shadow World into the Ultimate Void Battleground. The moment he arrived at the Ultimate Void Battleground, he felt something amiss. He narrowed his eyes slightly. On the surface, he did not show any expression, but in fact, his attention had already fallen on an item in the number 1 treasure vault. It was a sacred white incomplete seal formed by a large number of illusory lines. It was the illusionary legendary Tear Sage seal. At this moment, it was trembling non-stop and looked like it was about to fly out. Seeing this, Zhou 16 pondered as he used his divine power to suppress the incomplete illusionary legendary Tear Sage seal fragment. This illusionary legendary Tear Sage seal had a total of 5 fragments. Due to fate, he already had 2 fragments. Originally, he didn't pay much attention to this thing. He mainly left it up to fate and didn't even investigate much. This thing was very difficult to investigate after all. Even the Bodhi Supreme did not know of its existence. He didn't expect that the 3rd fragment of the illusionary legendary Tear Sage seal would appear in front of him. That's right. With his control over the incomplete illusionary legendary Tear Sacred seal, he could sense that the fragment of the illusionary legendary Tear Sacred seal was shaking because it sensed that other fragments were nearby. God help me! Treasures come to you! A smile appeared on Zhou 16's face. He memorized the location of the treasure and did not immediately look for it. This was because someone had come to look for him. A blood-colored stream of light exuding an evil aura flew over from afar and quickly arrived in front of him. He smiled happily and said, "Big brother. As soon as I sensed your presence, I came over." The person who spoke was naturally the Lord of 10,000 Evils. Zhou 16 nodded with a smile. "Let's go. Let's go to dinner. I can prepare a lot of delicacies, each of which will be unforgettable for you." "Brother, do you know the sacred Lord of Food and Sleep? He is the expert who used delicious food as his nomological path and became a supreme god all the way. For today's banquet, I specially invited that person over and even brought out a lot of good ingredients to let big brother and little brother eat and drink to their heart's content." The Lord of 10,000 Evils excitedly wanted to drag Zhou 16 to the banquet. He had prepared a lot for today's banquet. It wasn't just the delicacies. Fine wine, beautiful women, beautiful music, and beautiful scenery. He had almost prepared everything as long as it could be thought about. Wait a minute. Zhou 16 helplessly organized him. This guy. He and the other party had only met for a few days. It couldn't be that bad, right? However, he didn't say it out loud. Instead, "Let me meet the Supreme Will first." Lord of 10,000 Evils was stunned. Then, he slapped his head. "I almost forgot the rules. Big brother is right. It's time to meet the Supreme Will. Let's go, big brother. We'll go together. The Lord Supreme will probably summon me too. As for the banquet, it won't be too late to start it later." The Lord of 10,000 Evils hurriedly said. Zhou 16 nodded and flew away with the Lord of 10,000 Evils. During the flight, the Lord of 10,000 Evils handed a world ring to Zhou 16. "Big brother, these are the ultimate void crystal and chaos divine treasure you wanted," he said. Zhou 16 received it and sent his willpower into it. Then, he saw that there were a total of 8,132 units of Chaos Divine Treasures and 66 units of Ultimate Void Crystals in this world rings. When Zhou 16 saw this, he was very satisfied. This time, the number of Chaos Divine Treasures in the main body's hands had already reached 16,700 units, far exceeding the requirements to advance to a Grade 1 Supreme God territory. As for the Ultimate Void Divine Crystals, he was still short of 12 units including the ones that his main body already had. However, Zhou 14 and Zhou 15 should be able to find the missing Ultimate Void Crystal. When the time came, the requirements to advance to Grade 1 Supreme God territory were all met. Big Brother's gift to you. Catch! Zhou 16 took out a world ring and threw it to the Lord of 10,000 Evils. The Lord of 10,000 Evils took it and curiously let the power of will enter. Then, he saw that there were actually 50,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts, 10 million Master God Tier Divine Artifacts, and 1,000,000 Grade 1 Supreme God Divine Crystals in this world rings. The Lord of 10,000 Evils' hand trembled and he almost threw the world ring away. Big Brother! The Lord of 10,000 Evils was still in shock as he smiled bitterly, I'm just running around. Big Brother, you've given me too much. So much so that I feel like I'm burning. Take it. Zhou 16 shook his head nonchalantly. All you need to know is that your brother won't be able to use all these things. Take it as sharing this pain for me. The corners of the Lord of 10,000 Evils' mouth twitched a few times. Big Brother is really getting better at showing off. However, he was really awesome, so the Lord of 10,000 Evils couldn't feel disgusted. He only felt that his big brother was getting more and more awesome. He had a feeling that he would never catch up to this brother of his. Chapter 1709, The Shock of the Supreme Will. Gift. 1. It was just some Supreme Divine Artifacts, Master God Tier Divine Artifacts, and Divine Crystals. His main body and clones were nothing to him. The resources given to the Lord of 10,000 Evils were far inferior to the daily war income of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. Therefore, Zhou 16 naturally did not mind. Furthermore, the Lord of 10,000 Evils was now close to him and might become his ally or even subordinate in the future. If he gave some resources at this time to allow his strength and power to quickly increase, it would be beneficial to his present and future. The two deities chatted along the way and teleported. They soon arrived at the location of the Supreme Will's avatar. The Supreme Will avatar was currently in the sacred region of the original Ultimate Void race, watching the Supreme Army and the Ultimate Void race's army fight below. When Zhou 16 saw this, he looked over curiously. Then, he was secretly shocked. The direct descendant army of the Supreme Will, the Supreme Army, was indeed powerful. Each of them could completely suppress the God Spirit soldiers of the Ultimate Void race. Ordinary God Spirits suppressed Ultimate Void True God Tiers, and True God Tiers suppressed Ultimate Void Master God Tiers. They could be seen everywhere on the battlefield. Even a Master God Tier could suppress or even kill the Supreme God of the Ultimate Void race with the advantage of numbers and military formations. Their individual combatability and joint combatability completely crushed top Supreme Soldier types like the Supreme God Realm Soldiers and the Supreme Holy Mage God under Zhou Zhou. Furthermore, their combat style was experienced and decisive. They were clearly all experienced warriors. Is this a Supreme Soldier type? Or a Transcendent Soldier type? Zhou 16 was curious and envious. He did not know how the Supreme Soldier types under him would be promoted to Supreme Soldier types in the future. He had yet to obtain any news regarding this. Sometimes, the main body would even wonder if there was a training method for Supreme Soldier types in the Supreme Great Cosmos. This was because among the Supreme Forces of Will that he knew, there were no subordinates of Supreme Soldier types. On the other hand, the Supreme Will and the Crimson Overlord had one of the Transcendent Soldier types, the Supreme Legion and the Crimson Overlord. Speaking of which, at this moment, on the battlefield, the Supreme Army relied on their overwhelming strength to easily suppress and kill the larger Ultimate Void Race army. The Ultimate Void Race's God Spirit army was decreasing at a visible speed. Clearly, it would be completely destroyed soon. As for the God Spirits of the Supreme Army, there had not been any obvious casualties so far. Even if a God Spirit died, they would quickly revive with their own methods or the help of other God Spirits in a short period of time and then return to the battlefield to continue fighting. Zhou 16 clicked his tongue in wonder. Even though he knew how his main body revived soldiers, it was definitely not unique to him in the myriad worlds. However, the Supreme Army was really the first army faction he had seen that had the ability to revive on a large scale. He was not surprised. It would be strange if an army force of this level did not have the ability to revive. Greetings, Lord Supreme Will. Zhou 16 and the Lord of 10,000 Evils said respectfully after regaining their senses. The Supreme Will nodded. When his gaze landed on Zhou 16, a smile appeared on his face. The main body of the common people's regal is too careful. The ultimate void battlefield has already completely returned to our hands. Why did you still send your clone? In the reincarnation sacred palace. Zhou Zhou stood up from the Dao comprehension futon with a bitter smile and said respectfully. I just think that there's nothing wrong with being careful. Furthermore, what I want to do the most now is to raise my cultivation realm to the level of the Supreme Will realm. This way, I can truly have the ability to protect myself, be it in the two universes or the ultimate void great cosmos. In addition, I'm already used to sending clones to do things, so I sent a clone over. The Supreme Will stood above the sanctuary of the ultimate void battleground. He smiled and nodded from an unknown distance. All right, you're right. The Supreme God realm is indeed very low. The sooner you advance to the Supreme Will realm, the sooner I can arrange more important missions for you. Yes, Supreme Will. Zhou Zhou nodded slightly. The Supreme Will turned around and said, the outcome of the ultimate void battlefield has been decided. From now on, your order will rise by 1. From now on, you will be the third reserve army of the Supreme Lord. The Lord of 10,000 Evils, your order has to be lowered by 1. From today onwards, you are the Supreme Lord's fourth reserve army. However, common people's regal, if you slack off in the future or fall behind the Lord of 10,000 Evils, you don't need me to do it myself. Your declining luck will automatically make you fall back to the Supreme Lord's fourth reserve army. Lord of 10,000 Evils, don't be discouraged. As long as you maintain your desire to improve at all times and strive to surpass the common people's regal, the position of the Third Reserve Army Supreme Lord will still be yours. Yes, Supreme Will. Zhou 16 smiled. The Lord of 10,000 Evils also responded very respectfully, but he smiled bitterly in his heart. Surpassing the common people's regal? He knew best how shocking the progress of the common people's regal was as a lord who had worked with the common people's regal for a period of time. Thinking back, when the common people's regal first came to the ultimate void battleground, he did not even have a supreme god under him. It had only been a few days, but there were already hundreds of supreme gods under him. His own strength had already surpassed the Lord of 10,000 Evils. The Lord of 10,000 Evils really did not dare to hope that he could surpass the other party's improvement speed. Chapter 1710. The Shock of the Supreme Will. Gift. 2. He was already very satisfied to be able to pull strings and call the other party Big Brother now. At the same time, the two gods almost immediately felt the changes in their bodies after the Supreme Will mentioned the changes in the order of the two gods. Zhou 16's feelings were the most obvious. He could clearly sense that the providence of his main body had increased by 10 times almost immediately after the Supreme Will made the decision. It was as if he had immediately become the son of destiny who enjoyed the blessings of the heavens. In the future, all kinds of good things, opportunities, and help from the strong would descend on him endlessly. If an ordinary enemy wanted to deal with him, if the other party did not have the protection of great providence, he might not even be able to attack him. He would be counterattacked by this astonishing providence. When that happened, a large number of unlucky things would constantly happen to that enemy. It was very likely that before the other party could send troops and experts to deal with Zhou Zhou, he would suffer huge losses because of all kinds of unlucky things. He might even die. If the other party also had great luck protecting him, but the other party's great luck was weaker than his, it was very likely that he would be defeated for various reasons when he attacked him. This was the unreasonable part of the protection of luck. It could be said to be a force that could subdue others without fighting. Zhou 16 was very satisfied with the increase in his luck. It was not in vain that his main body and avatars had done their best to resolve the matter of the ultimate void battlefield. They had finally been rewarded. The Supreme Will looked at Zhou 16 and smiled. You took most of the credit for solving the problem of the ultimate void battlefield. Coupled with the fact that you've become the third reserve army of the Supreme Lord, I've decided to reward you with something. However, I'm afraid you won't even be interested in some Supreme Will level treasures with your current wealth, right? How? Zhou 16 hurriedly said, even though I have a few Supreme Will treasures on me, it doesn't mean that I don't lack such things. If the Supreme Will rewards me with treasures at the Supreme Will realm, I will be very satisfied. Your Excellency, I'll take my leave. When the Lord of 10,000 Evils saw this scene, he tactfully prepared to leave. The Lord of 10,000 Evils winked at Zhou 16 before leaving after the Supreme Will agreed. "You're quite good. You gave away tens of thousands of supreme divine artifacts and a vast number of Master God tier divine artifacts as if they were free. Coupled with our past friendship, the Lord of 10,000 Evils really treats you like a big brother now." The Supreme Will clicked his tongue in wonder. "I'm also very satisfied to have such a relationship with your Excellency Lord of 10,000 Evils. As for some mere Master God tier divine artifacts, supreme divine artifacts, and divine crystals, it's just a worldly possession. It's fine to give it to him as long as he likes it." Zhou 16 smiled. "I love it, too." The Supreme Will blinked. Zhou 16 was stunned. This was the first time he had seen the Supreme Will's expression. It turned out that the Supreme Will was not as distant as he had imagined. Perhaps this was the benefit of his improved status and strength. Zhou 16 did not think too much about it. He directly took out a world ring that he had prepared long ago and handed it to the Supreme Will with both hands. "This subordinate has long prepared a gift from the Supreme Will." Zhou 16 smiled. "Oh." The Supreme Will's eyes lit up. He took the world rings and checked the items inside. Then, he clearly looked shocked. This was because this world ring contained a total of 100 million Master God tier divine artifacts and a million supreme divine artifacts. The total value of these divine artifacts was simply terrifying. Even the Supreme Will was extremely shocked that he could create Master God tier divine artifacts, supreme divine artifacts, and even will holy artifacts out of thin air. The amount of willpower origin energy decreased with every use. This decrease would even affect one's strength, causing one's strength to decrease. If one wanted to replenish this portion of willpower origin energy, they needed a large number of high-quality supplements to replenish it. Such high-quality supplements could only be obtained in the ultimate void great cosmos and were very expensive. Even the Supreme Will did not want to easily buy and use such high-quality supplements. Therefore, he wouldn't easily create a divine artifact in order not to expend the origin power of his will and reduce his strength. This resulted in not many supreme divine artifacts in the supreme great cosmos. Many supreme gods even used Master God tier divine artifacts as their main battle equipment. Fortunately, after Zhou Zhou gave the Supreme Will a large number of supreme divine artifacts last time, the supreme divine artifacts in the supreme great cosmos were no longer lacking supreme divine artifacts. Almost every supreme god had a supreme divine artifact at the very least, and the highest even had a full set of supreme divine artifacts. The high-end combat power of the entire supreme great cosmos had increased several times because of the 150,000 supreme divine artifacts that Zhou Zhou had given to the Supreme Will. Even the supreme gods in the Crimson Great Cosmos had obtained tens of thousands of supreme divine artifacts because of the deal between the Supreme Will and the Crimson Overlord, increasing the overall strength of the supreme gods in the Crimson Great Cosmos. Because of this, the Supreme Will was very satisfied with Zhou Zhou, the Supreme Lord Reserve Army. This was because the reserve armies of the four Supreme Lords under him were the ones that the common people's regal gave him the earliest, and they also surprised him the most. That 150,000 supreme divine artifacts could not be faked. How long has it been? The common people's regal actually took out so many supreme divine artifacts and so many Master God tier divine artifacts. This was a fortune that could make Supreme Will Realm experts go crazy and move willpower experts even in the ultimate void great cosmos. Even though these Master God tier divine artifacts and supreme divine artifacts were not very useful to the supreme willpower realm and willpower powerhouses, they could arm the strength of the subordinates under them and increase the strength of the subordinates under them after all. The strength of a faction was equally important to top-notch experts. I like this gift very much. Even though the Supreme Great Cosmos no longer lacks supreme divine artifacts. However, with this batch of supreme divine artifacts, I can go to the ultimate void great cosmos to make a deal and exchange them for what I need. The Supreme Will smiled. Zhou 16 nodded thoughtfully. He did not feel sorry for the 100 million Master God tier divine artifacts and 1 million supreme divine artifacts that he had just given away. As long as he didn't stop fighting, he could save up these divine artifacts in 2 to 3 days after all. They weren't very precious to him. It would be worth it if he could use this to exchange for the attention of the Supreme Will. What he was thinking about was what the Supreme Will said. In that case, I can completely rely on the divine artifacts and divine crystals in my hands to make the clones I send eat well in the ultimate void great cosmos and exchange them for the treasures and resources I need. I can totally be a rich person in the ultimate void cosmos if things go well. When the time comes, I might not even need to collect the ultimate void crystals and chaos divine treasures myself. I can just buy them. The more Zhou 16 thought about it, the brighter his eyes became. This is another good way to collect your own resources. You gave me such a batch of divine artifacts again. This makes it difficult for me to give you any rewards. Even the Supreme Will Realm treasures can't compare to these divine artifacts. The Supreme Will smiled. This is just a token of my appreciation, Lord Supreme Will, you don't have to think too much about it. I will like whatever reward you give me. Zhou 16 smiled. It was naturally simple for him to say some beautiful words with so many bloodline inheritances in his mind. The Supreme Will smiled. He thought for a moment and stretched out his right hand. I think you'll like this reward very much. A golden ball of light slowly appeared in his palm. What's this? Zhou 16 asked curiously. He could sense that the things inside the ball of light seemed to be very important to him. This intuition was very strong. The next cultivation method of the Supreme Sacred Body. It can allow you to break through to the Supreme Sacred Body realm and cultivate all the way to the upper realm. The Supreme Will said. Chapter 1711. Taking over the Ultimate Void Battlefield, 1. Zhou 16 was invigorated as an ecstatic expression appeared on his face. It was actually the follow-up cultivation method of the Supreme Sacred Body. Moreover, it was a cultivation method that went all the way to the upper Supreme Will realm. Didn't that mean that he could successfully possess the Lord Talent at the Supreme Will realm after he cultivated the Supreme Sacred Body to the Supreme Will realm? And that was not even the point. Zhou 16, who already knew the origins of the Supreme Sacred Body, knew very well that the Supreme Sacred Body was a part of an eternal immortal realm. Inheritance. And it was this small portion that they didn't have, be it Lord of 10,000 Evils, Lord of Spring and Autumn, or God King Heaven Punishment. Only him, a newly promoted Supreme Lord Reserve Army, had long possessed this portion of the inheritance. Zhou 16 did not know if the Supreme Will thought highly of him or if there were other reasons for it to hand over this portion of the inheritance to him, but it was ultimately a good thing. And now, the Supreme Will was about to hand over a portion of the inheritance to him. Zhou 16 could not help but think about something. Is the Supreme Will really going to pass the position of Supreme Lord to him? Otherwise, why would he be so generous as to give him the Eternal Immortal Realm inheritance? There was no time to think about the reason. There were too few arguments after all. They were just deductions no matter how much he deduced. He stretched out his hands and solemnly took the golden ball of light from the Supreme Will. Zhou 16 looked at the golden ball of light as the power of his will stirred slightly. The next second, the golden ball of light turned into countless specks of light that flew around Zhou 16's divine body. Then, like a swallow returning to its nest, they surged into his glabella and fused into his divine spark. Zhou 16 closed his eyes. At the same time, far away in the reincarnation sacred palace, Zhou Zhou also closed his eyes and simultaneously sensed and browsed through this portion of the eternal immortal realm inheritance. After a long time, Zhou Zhou slowly opened his eyes. Excitement appeared on his face. Cool. That's amazing. Is this the inheritance that leads directly to the eternal immortal realm? Compared to the inheritance of the Chaos Will, this eternal immortal realm inheritance is much simpler in terms of advancing to the Supreme Will realm. But just the succinct part of it made me feel enlightened. This experience of accepting an inheritance far exceeds the inheritance of the will of the Chaos Will. Zhou Zhou's eyes lit up. Even though he was only a grade 3 Supreme God realm now, it was very exaggerated that he already had several top-notch inheritances. This included the inheritance of the Supreme Will realm, the inheritance of the will, and the eternal immortal realm inheritance given to him by the Supreme Will. The top-notch inheritance was undoubtedly the will inheritance of the Chaos Will and the incomplete eternal immortal realm inheritance of the Supreme Will. Previously, he had accidentally obtained the willpower inheritance of the Chaos Will through unifying the Chaos Humans. After that, he had been studying this willpower inheritance. After that, he had indeed benefited greatly. Otherwise, he would not have been able to break through to the grade 3 Supreme God realm so quickly. The speed at which Zhou Zhou advanced from a grade 2 Supreme God to a grade 3 Supreme God realm was even faster than the speed at which he advanced from a grade 1 Supreme God to a grade 2 Supreme God. Other than the few treasures that assisted in cultivation, the will inheritance of the Chaos Will could be said to have played a decisive role. He originally thought that the Chaos Will's will inheritance was already top-notch. However, he did not expect that after reading the legacy of the eternal immortal realm, he would suddenly feel that the legacy of the chaos will seemed a little crude. The eternal immortal realm inheritance provided simple and straightforward answers to some key advancement points, but the chaos will's will inheritance explained it as it was very complicated and difficult to understand. When the two were compared, the difference was obvious. With this partial inheritance of the eternal immortal realm, my chances of advancing to the supreme will realm in the future will increase by at least 30%. Zhou Zhou's eyes lit up. Regarding this guess, he was very confident and certain. It couldn't be helped. The eternal immortal realm inheritance was that powerful. It was like asking a genius mathematics professor to solve a math problem for an ordinary high school student. Was that still considered a question? Wouldn't he be able to find out the answer with a casual glance? Many thanks to the Supreme Will for bestowing this technique. That's exactly what I want. Zhou Zhou thanked him. The Supreme Will smiled. He had clearly expected Zhou Zhou's reaction. Then, he asked. The inheritance of Yellow River's will. How's the preparation on your side? Reporting to your majesty. I've already sent a clone to Yellow River. Zhou Zhou said respectfully. Fight to obtain the inheritance of the Yellow River's will. We don't want the inheritance of the Supreme Great Cosmos to fall into the hands of the Illusionist clan. If the other party uses the Yellow River's will to deal with us in the future, just thinking about it is disgusting. The Supreme Will laughed. I'll get it. Zhou Zhou guaranteed. The Supreme Will nodded. Clearly, he was very confident in Zhou Zhou's strength. He knew very well that with Zhou Zhou's strength, there were probably very few supreme gods who could find an opponent. It was not an exaggeration to consider he as the #1 expert below the Supreme Will realm. The Yellow River land of inheritance was another place where only supreme gods could enter. If Zhou Zhou's clone went, there was a high chance that nothing would go wrong. However, in order to be cautious, he still reminded, I know you're strong enough, but you still have to be careful. Chapter 1712. Taking over the Ultimate Void Battlefield, 2. The Illusionist clan is the conceptual god extraordinary tier system. Their methods are strange and unpredictable. Even if you are much stronger than they, you might fall into their trap if you are not careful. When the time comes, remember not to slack off. Yes, my lord. Zhou Zhou nodded. The Supreme Will nodded and waved his hand. Go. The war is not over yet. The two of you should go in and practice. Let me see how far you've come in this time. Don't worry. The Ultimate Void Race's Supreme Will Realm existences will be targeted by our Supreme Will Realm existences. They won't attack you. When this war is over, you can do whatever you want. Oh, yet. One more thing. You were the one who conquered the Ultimate Void battlefield. After this war has completely calmed down, you can take over the position of the Lord of 10,000 Evils and take charge of this battlefield. Even though this Ultimate Void battleground is lonely, it contains many benefits. Let's not talk about the Void Mystic realms that contain rich promotion energy. The Ultimate Void battleground also has the ability to attract ownerless treasures floating in the Ultimate Void outside. Every year, Lord of 10,000 Evils could rely on this battlefield to gather a large number of ownerless treasures from the Ultimate Void Great Cosmos. There was no lack of Supreme God level treasures, and occasionally, there were even Supreme Will level treasures that were attracted over. The Lord of 10,000 Evils has accumulated a lot of resources just by relying on this source of harvest. I believe that after you take over this Ultimate Void battlefield, you will definitely be able to obtain more and better treasures than the Lord of 10,000 Evils. The Supreme Will smiled at Zhou 16. He knew very well how astonishing the luck of his successor was, and how good he was at obtaining treasures. If the Lord of 10,000 Evils could obtain a number of treasures of one every year through the Ultimate Void battleground, then after the common people's regal took charge of this place, the number of treasures he could obtain every year could probably be described as 100. This was the terror of the common people's regal's ability to collect treasures. Otherwise, where did he get so many Master God tier divine artifacts and Supreme divine artifacts? Zhou 16 looked hesitant. The Supreme Will could tell at a glance what Zhou 16 was conflicted about. The Lord of 10,000 Evils had already treated him as the underling of the common people's regal after all. As a big brother, he felt like he was snatching his little brother's territory. It was indeed a strange feeling. Don't worry about it. I've already asked the Lord of 10,000 Evils about this. The Lord of 10,000 Evils has already agreed. The Supreme Will said. In fact, he wouldn't be able to say anything with his identity, even if he didn't ask the Lord of 10,000 Evils and directly assigned the ultimate void battlefield to Zhou Zhou. This was because the ultimate void battlefield was created by the Supreme Will. He could let whoever he wanted to manage it. The Lord of 10,000 Evils was already very considerate of his feelings to ask about this. Zhou 16 could not say anything. Since there was no need for he to shirk responsibility, the Lord of 10,000 Evils had agreed. The ultimate void battleground was indeed a treasure land after all. It would be hypocritical to say you don't want it. It's settled then. Go to the battlefield with the Lord of 10,000 Evils. The Supreme Will said. Yes, my lord. Zhou 16 nodded and left. The Supreme Will looked at Zhou 16's departing figure and then at the world. Rings in his hand. A faint smile appeared on his face. Common people's regal. The legacy of the eternal immortal realm is very good. However, not every god spirit who cultivates the eternal immortal realm inheritance can reach the peak. Even I have more than one eternal immortal realm inheritance in my hands. Haven't I always stopped at this position and been unable to reach that position for a long time? Don't underestimate the difficulty of reaching that level. The Supreme Will muttered. On the other side, after Zhou 16 returned, he first looked for Lord of 10,000 Evils and told him that the Supreme Will wanted them and the Lord of 10,000 Evils to test their skills on the battlefield. The Lord of 10,000 Evils immediately understood what the Supreme Will meant. This was a test for them. No problem. Come on, big brother. The Lord of 10,000 Evils said happily. Wait a minute. Zhou 16 stopped him before asking, the Lord Supreme Will told me about the ultimate void battleground just now. Big brother. The Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled and raised his hand. Actually, I'm already tired of staying in the ultimate void battleground. I've been in this place for too long, so long that I almost thought that I would have to die here to leave. In fact, if it weren't for the obsession in my heart, I would have left long ago and lived the life I wanted. Now that you're here, and you're more suitable to take charge of this place than me, entrusting this place to you is something I can't ask for more. The Lord of 10,000 Evils sighed. Big brother, you know that before I became a Supreme Lord Reserve Army, I was already a demon sealer. My favorite thing to do is to use my best sealing skills to bring my companions to travel the myriad worlds and seal the demons of the myriad worlds, bringing peace to the myriad worlds without demonic harassment. Now that I can finally get on with my life, don't leave me with the burden again. On the other hand, very few demons appear in the myriad worlds these days. I plan to go to the ultimate void great cosmos and take a look at the other great cosmoses. I want to experience the unique scenery of the other great cosmoses. The Lord of 10,000 Evils' eyes emitted an extremely bright light as he said this. I'm already tired of looking at the supreme great cosmos. I should go out and take a look. Zhou 16 looked at him for a long time before nodding slowly. Okay, then I'll stay here. If you need any help in the future, just let me know. I will definitely help you if I can help. I'll keep that in mind. The Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled. Coincidentally, I have several clones in the ultimate void great cosmos. In the future, when you travel through the ultimate void great cosmos, if you encounter any difficulties, you can ask them for help. Zhou 16 continued. Then, he sent the personal terminal numbers of Zhou 13 and Zhou 14 to Lord of 10,000 Evils. Thank you, big brother. Lord of 10,000 Evils said with a smile. He didn't refuse. Instead, he actively memorized Zhou 13 and Zhou 14's numbers. After all, what if he could use it one day? The ultimate void great cosmos was so dangerous that he could not roam freely there even though he was already a grade 4 supreme god. Having a few more means of self-preservation was naturally a good thing. Naturally, he would not refuse. Then, the two of them did not say anything else and immediately rushed into the battlefield hand in hand. Big brother, how about we see who kills more enemies? I win as long as I kill 1/10 of your number. The Lord of 10,000 Evils said happily. Okay. The corners of Zhou 16's lips curled up as he agreed. The Lord of 10,000 Evils' eyes lit up. Big brother actually agreed to it. Even though his big brother had the strength of a top-notch quasi-supreme willpower practitioner, he was a grade 4 supreme god after all. He also had many methods and trump cards given to him by the supreme will. No matter how he thought about it, it was impossible for him to lose such a game. Could big brother be giving in to me? To make me happy? Forget it. He had to win first. The Lord of 10,000 Evils only felt that victory was already in his grasp. In order not to waste time, he didn't say a word and directly rushed into the enemy's crowd to start killing wantonly. Compared to the anxious Lord of 10,000 Evils, Zhou 16, on the other hand, appeared much calmer. Il didn't even move. He only maintained his strength at the quasi-supreme willpower realm. Then, he struck the enemy's gathering spot with his palms. A large number of enemies died with every palm strike. Among them, there was no lack of supreme gods and even quasi-supreme willpower experts. Of course, there were also master god tiers, true god tiers, and ordinary god spirits. However, no matter how great the difference in strength between them was, in front of Zhou 16's myriad method star palm, there was only one outcome: the death of all living beings. At this moment, there seemed to be no difference between a supreme god and an ordinary god spirit. The Lord of 10,000 Evils were engrossed in killing. Occasionally, he would turn around and see the scene. When he saw Zhou 16 kill the supreme gods as if they were chickens, he was dumbfounded. What? What's the point of competing? The corners of the Lord of 10,000 Evils' mouth twitched. Chapter 1713. Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep, 1. An hour later, the competition between Zhou 16 and the Lord of 10,000 Evils had ended. This was because the ultimate void race had already been completely wiped out. Not a single god spirit of the ultimate void race had survived. The Supreme Will had no intention of surrendering this group of fellows who had invaded his universe and had fanatical faith in the ultimate void race. Only by eradicating all of them could they be worthy of the crimes they had committed in the Supreme Great Cosmos for so many years. The result of the competition between the two deities was as expected. Zhou 16 won with an absolute advantage. He had killed 10 times more god spirits than Lord of 10,000 Evils. And this was under the condition that Zhou 16 hadn't used his full strength, while the Lord of 10,000 Evils had used his full strength. Otherwise, the disparity would be even greater. After the two god spirits met, the Lord of 10,000 Evils said with a bitter smile, "I won't compete with Big Brother in this kind of competition anymore." He felt that he was humiliating himself. Zhou 16 smiled and did not say a word. Even though the Lord of 10,000 Evils was a little depressed, he didn't feel conflicted. This was because he had already tacitly acknowledged that there was a huge difference in strength between him and his big brother. It was just that he didn't expect the difference to be so huge before the competition. He quickly forgot his depressed mood and said with a smile, "Big brother, let's go. The banquet is long overdue." Zhou 16 nodded. Il wasn't in a hurry to get the fragment of the legendary tier illusionary sage seal. Even the Supreme Will didn't discover the existence of the incomplete sage seal after all. It wouldn't be a problem for him to get it later. Hence, Zhou 16 went to attend the banquet with the Lord of 10,000 Evils. And this banquet was indeed as the Lord of 10,000 Evils had said. Not only were the various dishes high-end, but they were also very delicious. They were even quite helpful to Zhou 16's cultivation. In fact, Zhou 16 even felt that with the power he borrowed from these supreme god-level dishes, he had a feeling that his strength had temporarily increased by about 20% after a simple meal. Don't be fooled by the two levels, one had to know that he was an expert who was infinitely close to the true Supreme Will realm. 20% of his strength was enough to make dozens or even hundreds of quasi-Supreme Will realm experts look up to him. It could be seen how terrifyingly powerful these dishes were after being enhanced. As expected of an expert who became a supreme god with the path of gourmet food. The culinary skills are unquestionable. Zhou 16 was surprised. At his level, there weren't many things in life forms that could surprise him. Obviously, this supreme god invited by the Lord of 10,000 Evils was one of them. Zhou 16 looked at the delicacies on the table in front of him and could not help but have an idea. Why don't I invite this guy to be my personal royal chef? He can make any request he wants. With the current conditions of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom, it was simply easy to satisfy the requirements of a supreme god. Even if he was given the opportunity to reach the Supreme Will realm, it was not impossible with the top legacy in his hands. Since this supreme god chef could even increase his own strength, he must have nurtured more military chefs to increase the combat power of the soldiers under him. Whatever Zhou 16 did now, he wanted his main body's divine kingdom to be able to rise in power. Even if they hired a master chef, they were wondering if they could promote the master chef's skills to the entire army. He immediately went to Lord of 10,000 Evils to discuss this matter with him. When the Lord of 10,000 Evils heard Zhou 16's words, he immediately laughed. I knew that you wouldn't be able to resist recruiting him under your command after tasting his cooking. The Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled and said, because I had the same thought after eating his delicacies for the first time. I even sent someone to invite him and was turned down. Zhou 16 nodded. I was rejected. The Lord of 10,000 Evils' expression was a little regretful before he smiled in relief. However, because of this matter, I accidentally became friends with him. With the help of my friends, it's not a problem for me to invite him over to make some dishes for me and my friends, such as this time. He looked a little proud. This was because it was very difficult to be like him and invite this sacred Lord of Food and Sleep to cook for him. No supreme god could do it. Even God King Heaven Punishment and Spring Autumn Dharma Lord could not do it. This was also his pride. Other than him, perhaps only someone in the Supreme Will Realm could casually order Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep to cook for them. When Zhou 16 heard that, he could not help but be surprised and curious. A Supreme God would actually reject the recruitment of a Supreme Lord Reserve Army? He was only willing to cook for him occasionally? What's his reason for refusing? Zhou 16 asked curiously. He said that he only likes to cook for ordinary life forms and doesn't want to be the exclusive imperial chef of a certain powerhouse. That would go against his heart as a chef. The Lord of 10,000 Evils praised, there's a legend. Once, the Sun Divine Court and the Great Lunar Court personally sent a Supreme Will Realm cultivator over to invite the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep to be their exclusive imperial chef. But even so, the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep rejected their invitation. The Sun Divine Court and the Great Lunar Court did not force the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep to join them after knowing his reason for rejection. Because they knew that if this really went against the original intention of the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep, even if the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep was forcefully invited to be their exclusive imperial chef, the taste Li made would probably not be as delicious as before. It would only be as ordinary dishes. Chapter 1714 Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep, 2. The Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep's strength might decrease because of this and might even fall to the true God tier level since this matter is against his will. And willpower is the true source of powerhouses above Master God tier. If you go against your will, your strength will decrease at best, and your Dao heart will collapse at worst. It's not impossible for you to die. The Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled. If not for this reason, Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep, who had astonishing culinary skills, might really have been forcefully invited by those Supreme Willpower Realm experts to be their cooking tool. Fortunately, the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep still had his freedom and could still make delicious dishes that countless god spirits and even Supreme Willpower Realm experts would savor because of this reason. Zhou 16 clicked his tongue in wonder. From the looks of it, this Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep was quite legendary. He had even rejected the invitation of a Supreme Will Realm expert. Furthermore, after rejecting it, not only was he safe and sound, but he had also become famous and renowned in the entire God Spirit circle. That's true. Those Supreme Will Realm experts only wanted to cat delicacies. If the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep failed to make delicious food because of his invitation, not only would he not be able to eat delicious food, but he would also be tainted with the bad reputation of forcibly making a Supreme God Eli's subordinate, causing the Supreme God's Dao heart to shatter. Just the thought of it made him instinctively want to avoid it. Still, Zhou 16 still wanted to give it a try. He wanted to dispel Zhou 16's thoughts just based on the Lord of 10,000 Evils' words. Then Zhou 16 would not be Zhou Zhou's clone. The Lord of 10,000 Evils was not surprised. I'll personally invite him over. Otherwise, if an ordinary Supreme God were to go over and invite him, with that guy's personality, he would probably reject him directly. The Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled. Then, he left directly. Zhou 68 while waiting. As for him personally inviting him? That's impossible. It would be fine if he was just a lone Supreme God. He could go and do whatever he wanted. However, not only did he represent himself, he also represented the face of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom, and even the face of the Supreme Will. If he humbly invited a Supreme God to be his Imperial Chef and was rejected, he would lose the face of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom and even the Supreme Will if word got out. It's not necessary to think about it. As for why the Lord of 10,000 Evils could invite him, it was because he was friends with the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep. Even if he was rejected, no one would say anything if word got out since he was invited him as a friend. At the same time, the Lord of 10,000 Evils also found the Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep At this moment, the sacred Lord of Food and Sleep was cooking a dish. When the Lord of 10,000 Evils saw this, he frowned slightly. However, after taking a deep breath, he still did not choose to disturb him. Instead, he waited quietly at the side. The moment the smell spread after 15 minutes of cooking, the Lord of 10,000 Evils couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He secretly clicked his tongue. The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep's culinary skills had improved again. Just the smell of the delicacies was enough to make him lose control of his grade 4 supreme god body. Who would believe it? At this moment, the sacred Lord of Food and Sleep also came back to his senses and saw the Lord of 10,000 Evils who had been waiting for a long time. Something wrong? The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep asked. Zhou, I'll take you to see a friend. The Lord of 10,000 Evils said. Zhou. It was sacred Lord of Food and Sleep's real name. No. The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep rejected without thinking. Do me a favor. He is my big brother. Go and take a look for my sake. My big brother is a very nice man. The Lord of 10,000 Evils said sincerely. The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep tilted his head. When did you have a big brother? Just. Who is it? Lord of 10,000 Evils raised his chest and said proudly, that's the 3rd Reserve Army of the Supreme Lord Common People's Regal who recently became famous in the myriad worlds and even founded the era of the Master Gods. The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep was surprised. Aren't you the Supreme Lord's 3rd Reserve Army? The Lord of 10,000 Evils laughed and said, are you sure you can't do it? Today's order was lowered, and the Supreme will personally announce it. It won't be long before the myriad worlds will know. The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep looked at him in wonder. The meaning was clear. Why are you still so happy when your status has already fallen? The Lord of 10,000 Evils understood what he meant, but he didn't explain. There was no need to. One day, they would know Big Brother's ability when Big Brother becomes the 2nd Reserve Army of the Supreme Lords, or even the 1st Reserve Army of the Supreme Lords, or even a true Supreme Lord. Let's go over since it's an invitation from the Common People's Regal. Right at that moment, the sacred Lord of Food and Sleep pondered for a moment before speaking. This time, it was the Lord of 10,000 Evils who was stunned. He agreed so easily. He thought that he would have to spend more effort to invite him over. This fellow even dared to reject the invitation of a Supreme Will Realm expert. He was not surprised to reject the invitation of him and the Common People's Regal. Le has already started to play the emotional card, and you're agreeing to it directly? The Lord of 10,000 Evils had a feeling that he had prepared many methods. But none of them were useful. Why don't you listen to me? The Lord of 10,000 Evils said indignantly. The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep. I've already agreed, what are you persuading me for? The Lord of 10,000 Evils quickly brought sacred Lord of Food and Sleep to Zhou 16. Greetings, Your Excellency Common People's Regal. The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep said respectfully. Even though he was very arrogant, it didn't mean that he was rude. On the contrary, he adhered to the rules in most situations. However, the will of his path could not allow him to become the exclusive possession of a powerhouse. Big brother. The Lord of 10,000 Evils said happily, he doesn't seem to dislike your summons. I didn't even try to persuade him, he took the initiative to come over. Oh. Zhou 16 looked at the sacred Lord of Food and Sleep in surprise and said. This seems to be inconsistent with your legendary style of doing things, sacred Lord of Food and Sleep. It's better to have a different attitude towards different god spirits. Some people are difficult to deal with. They have to decisively reject him. Sometimes, they even have to show some ruthless methods so that they won't be pestered by that kind of god spirit. For those with a good personality, I will also kindly refuse, and they will not make things too difficult for me. As for your majesty. The sacred Lord of Food and Sleep looked at Zhou 16 and slowly said, I used to cook for many living beings on the high continent. They don't even know my identity. They only know that I'm a vagrant chef who cooks very well. I've heard a lot about you from them. You treat your subjects very well. Your blazing sun divine kingdom is a habitable place that all living beings in the myriad worlds dream of living in. Your blazing sun divine kingdom is the only dream country that can be called a land of peace with the high continent and even the myriad worlds in the background of an abyss of war. I had my doubts about the truth of the matter. It wasn't until I personally went to the blazing sun divine kingdom and stayed there for a period of time that I found out. The legends I've heard about the common people's regal and the blazing sun divine kingdom only showcase 1% of the beautiful life in the blazing sun divine kingdom. Your pity for ordinary life forms and the peaceful country you created makes me respect you very much. At this point, he bowed deeply. You let me know that there's another country in this war-torn high continent that exists for peace and ordinary life forms. So when I heard that Your Excellency the Lord of 10,000 Evils asked me to meet you, I agreed without hesitation. Your Excellency common people's regal, thank you for your invitation. The Lord of 10,000 Evils was stunned. Zhou 16 blinked as well. Then, he smiled. He knew that the things that his main body was doing for the benefit of the subjects were never trivial matters that no one cared about. In this world, there would always be some existences who would pay attention to the lives of ordinary life forms. This emperor wants to invite you over to be a chef in our blazing sun divine kingdom. It's not the emperor's imperial chef alone, but the entire subject of the blazing sun divine kingdom. Will you do it? Zhou 16 asked. I'd be honored. The sacred lord of food and sleep said respectfully. Zhou 16 nodded with a smile. The Lord of 10,000 Evils was dumbfounded again. Chapter 1715. The Void Emperor with painstaking efforts. 1. Welcome to the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. In the future, in the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom, you can take on the position of the chief chef of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. This emperor won't ask you to cook delicacies for this emperor or other officials alone. You can cook for whoever you want. However, this emperor hopes that you will not be stingy with your abilities and impart them to others to nurture a professional team of chef professionals for the soldiers and citizens of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. Let the soldiers and every subject enjoy such delicious and enhanced delicacies. What do you say? Zhou 16 asked. I'm honored. The sacred lord of food and sleep said respectfully and excitedly. To be able to meet such a monarch who knew his nomological path and respected him, he truly felt that he was blessed. No wonder every living being that joined the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom worshipped and respected the common people's regal. It would be the same even if a deity with his personality came. Then, he thought for a moment and said, if your majesty wants to eat the delicacies I make, I'm still willing to make them for you. I'll also be very honored to make your majesty think that the food I make is worthy of tasting. In addition, if there are any important banquets in the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom that require some high-end delicacies, as a subject of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom, I am also very willing to contribute to the Divine Kingdom. Okay. Zhou 16 nodded with a smile. Then, he looked at Lord of 10,000 Evils strangely. Is that what you meant by not being easy to talk to? He even directly rejected the request for the strength of the Supreme Will Realm? I think he is pretty easy to talk to. I haven't even said much, but this sacred Lord of food and sleep feels like he is about to offer himself up. Isn't this person quite good? When Lord of 10,000 Evils saw Zhou 16's gaze, the entire god spirit nearly fainted. He was a little angry and incredulous. This guy wasn't like this when facing him. You're treating me differently. I can't accept this. I was clearly the first to know you. The Lord of 10,000 Evils had a stomach full of bitterness, but he couldn't say it out loud. It turned out that this guy also had a passionate side. He just didn't want to show it to himself. Get up. Zhou 16 didn't mind Lord of 10,000 Evils' strange reaction and spoke warmly to Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep. The Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep stood up with a smile on his face. The more Lord of 10,000 Evils looked at it, the more unbalanced he felt. He simply closed his eyes and stopped looking. Zhou 16 and Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep ignored he as Zhou 16 said. As the director of the Imperial Kitchen Department of our Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom, your status in the entire Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom is equivalent to a second-level official, second only to officials like this Emperor, the Prime Minister, and the Legion Commander. As for the salary, this Emperor can give you a salary comparable to a quasi-supreme willpower realm expert. Also, this is a small reward from this Emperor. This Emperor likes the delicacies you make very much. I hope to have the chance to taste your dishes more in the future. Zhou 16 smiled. Your Majesty, you're too kind. The Sacred Lord of Food and Sleep hurriedly said, if your Majesty wants to eat, just give the order. I guarantee that I will not have any complaints and will immediately make it for your Majesty. His Majesty is responsible for the lives of billions of subjects. I am willing and honored to cook for your Majesty, and will never think of it as an Intrusion. Zhou 16 clicked his tongue. How many times does he have to mention the word honor? I knew this guy was easy to talk to. Okay. This is your gift. Take a look. This emperor believes you will like it very much. Even in this emperor's treasury, there aren't many sets of this gift. As Zhou 16 spoke, he threw a world ring to the sacred lord of food and sleep. The sacred lord of food and sleep took it and carefully probed it with his willpower. Then, he was stunned for a moment before he immediately became extremely shocked and ecstatic. It's. Thank you, Your Majesty. I will never forget this reward. The sacred lord of food and sleep was so touched that he almost lost his voice. The lord of 10,000 evils was also curious. What kind of reward could make a guy like the sacred lord of food and sleep, who didn't change his expression easily, have such a big reaction? It's good that you like it. This emperor's efforts were not in vain. Zhou 16 chuckled. Then, he chatted with the sacred lord of food and sleep for a while longer before letting him continue cooking. Zhou 16 looked at the sacred lord of food and sleep's departing figure and felt very emotional. This guy had a simple personality and was obsessed with food. With he around, the blazing sun divine kingdom might be able to produce a few supreme gods of gourmet laws that would shock the myriad worlds in the future. They might even be existences at the supreme will realm on the path of food. With the excellent nurturing soil of the blazing sun divine kingdom, it was really possible to nurture such a genius after all. Big brother, what did you give that guy to make him so happy? The lord of 10,000 evils couldn't help but ask out of curiosity. Nothing. Zhou 16 smiled and said, it's just a grade 4 supreme god cooking utensil. It's not a supreme divine artifact of the orthodox combat type, but it's indeed rare. I only have about 100 sets. When the lord of 10,000 evils heard this, he immediately revealed a shocked expression. There were supreme god level cooking utensils. He had lived for so many years, but he had never heard of it, let alone seen it. From ancient times until now, there were very few grade 4 supreme gods who walked the path of delicacies, let alone grade 4 supreme god level cooking tools and divine artifacts after all. It could be considered an unorthodox one. However, his big brother actually had such an extremely unorthodox divine artifact? Chapter 1716. The Void Emperor with painstaking efforts. 2. No wonder the sacred lord of food and sleep was so excited. His cooking utensils were only those of Master God tier advanced grade. He had paid a huge price to obtain that kitchenware from the supreme god of creation, one of the 4 supreme gods. The sacred lord of food and sleep even regarded such a kitchenware as his most beloved treasure. Not to mention the grade 4 supreme god cooking utensils. Upon hearing the latter half of the sentence, the corners of his mouth twitched. His big brother was really acting cool all the time even though he was really awesome. After that, Zhou 16 chatted with the Lord of 10,000 Evils for a while and agreed that Lord of 10,000 Evils could come to IIS place and often freeload off the sacred Lord of Food and Sleep. After that, the Lord of 10,000 Evils left. And Zhou 16 did not waste any more time. He directly used the ultimate void travel and arrived at the ultimate void battleground. At this moment, there were no more god spirit soldiers here. Even the clone of the Supreme Will had left, leaving behind only a broken city in the sacred zone. Starting today, this ultimate void battleground is my territory plus the high continent on the verge of total conquest. I have 2 reserve army under my command. Neither the God King Heaven Punishment nor the Spring Autumn Dharma Lord had such treatment. Zhou 16 felt a little proud of his main body. Then, he didn't think much and immediately rushed into the sanctuary, flying according to the guidance of the illusionary legendary Tier Sage Seal Fragment. He felt very at ease. As expected, the Supreme Will's clone and the Supreme Army under him didn't discover the location of the other fragment. Only he, who had the other 2 fragments, could discover it. While Zhou 16 was pleasantly surprised, he was also more curious about the origin of this mysterious legendary Tier illusionary Sage Seal. He arrived at the location of the guide. This is it. Zhou 16 looked at the tall and incomplete dark purple throne in front of him. This dark purple throne was extremely tall. It was obvious that it was not for ordinary life forms to sit on. It should be the throne of the Void Emperor. Zhou 16 thought. He looked at the throne and could feel that there was something in the throne that seemed to be summoning him. Zhou 16 narrowed his eyes. Where is it? Zhou 16 was puzzled. Then, he began to search around the throne. After searching for a long time without finding anything, Zhou 16 pondered for a moment before sitting on the throne and falling into deep thought. This is the right place. But why can't I see what's inside? At the same time, inside the throne, a ball of dark purple flame like wool was quietly hiding here. Il looked through the throne and looked at the common people's regal sitting on his head. His dark purple eyes were like a dark purple abyss at this moment, making people fear him. Indeed, the fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal is indeed on him. I told you that my will had been restless, as if I had encountered a treasure that moved my will ever since common people's regal came to the ultimate void battleground. So it's because the fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sage seal has come to my territory. Oh! There's no supreme will behind this common people's regal. In other words, he has also hidden the existence of the fragment of the legendary tier sacred seal. It seems that he has also discovered that this legendary tier sacred seal is not simple. As expected of a creature blessed by great fortune. I only have one fragment. This little guy has 2 pieces on him. God help me. I accidentally obtained a fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sage seal even though I experienced a death tribulation. I was worth it even if I almost died. The illusionary emperor was burning with ambition. As long as he could become an eternal immortal realm existence, he would be willing even if he had to die 10 times what more almost dying once. He would definitely become an eternal immortal realm expert as long as he could survive. However, he couldn't help but feel anxious when he saw the common people's regal swaying around the throne and finally sitting on his head. The idiot! Why didn't you think that I was under the throne under his butt? I can take this opportunity to invade his will in one fell swoop as long as he dares to probe the power of his will and inspect the mysteries within the throne, thereby possessing him and reviving me. When the time comes, I can even make use of his identity and pretend to be the successor of the Supreme Will. After consuming all the resources of the Supreme Will, I can kill the Supreme Will in one go to avenge my death today. Damn it! Why hasn't he realized that there might be something he wants under the throne? The Void Emperor gritted his teeth. He was only one step away from success, and the other party was pulling him to the limit. It was really uncomfortable. Wait a minute. Could he had already discovered that I was inside the throne and was deliberately confusing me outside? This thought suddenly appeared in the Void Emperor's mind, and he could not help but be shocked. However, he looked at the shape above his head and felt that it was unlikely. How could he sit on his head casually if the other party had really discovered him? He did not believe that a supreme god would dare to treat a strong will like him. Furthermore, his throne was made from a transcendent level material in the ultimate void. How could a mere supreme god see through him in the throne? Let's wait. The Void Emperor had some patience again. He did not believe that a supreme god could not be interested in the inheritance of an eternal immortal realm expert. That was an inheritance that even he was extremely tempted by. Right at that moment, Zhou 16 stood up and muttered to himself. Never mind. It is okay if we can't find it. It is just a seal of unknown origin. There's no need to put so much effort into it. It's better to spend the time cultivating than staying here. Zhou 16 shook his head and prepared to leave. The Void Emperor, who was hiding in the throne, was dumbfounded. He suddenly realized a problem. Was it possible that common people's regal didn't know that this illusionary legendary tier sage seal represented the inheritance of an eternal immortal realm? Therefore, he didn't care about it at all. Thinking of this, he immediately panicked. He could not let this guy leave. Once this fellow left, not only would he not be able to obtain the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal fragment from him, but more importantly, he would not be able to obtain his divine body to be reborn. Such a desolate and vast place. He might never meet other life forms in his life if he missed the common people's regal. However, he did not dare to take the initiative to capture common people's regal and possess him. This was because the Supreme Will would definitely sense the aura of his incomplete will and quickly come looking for him once he left the protection of the throne. At that time, he might really lose his life, not to mention possessing the common people's regal. The Void Emperor could not help but feel fear at the thought of the Supreme Will. This Supreme Will was indeed a top-notch expert in the ultimate Void Great Cosmos that was on par with the Crimson Overlord. No wonder the Supreme Great Cosmos and the Crimson Great Cosmos had fought internally for so many years. Other Great Cosmos did not dare to take advantage of the chaos to have any ideas about them. Even though the number of experts in their multiverse was average, they as the leader of the multiverse was really strong. He couldn't even last an hour in front of the Supreme Will before he was taken down. This proved that there was an absolute difference in strength between him and the other party. However, I had no choice but to fight him head-on. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look resentfully at the common people's regal who was about to leave. It was all this guy's fault. It was this fellow who turned his originally good situation into this. He hesitated for a moment before taking out a piece of the seal. It was the fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal. He resisted the urge to put it back and threw the seal onto the throne. As expected, Zhou 16, who was about to leave, heard this strange sound. Then, she turned around and discovered the seal. Zhou 11 raised his eyebrows. He wanted to use the power of his will to bring it to him. It didn't work out. This thing was made of a transcendent level material. No one could hold it at a distance unless they were a strong willpower user under the ownerless state. Zhou 16 laughed when he saw this. He then shook his head, retracted his hand and sighed. Your Excellency Void Emperor, you really put in a lot of effort to lure me over. Chapter 1717. Killing the Void Emperor. 1. The Void Emperor's heart sank. This fellow had actually discovered him long ago. He suddenly felt a towering anger in his heart. He thought of the scene just now. He was clearly just a grade 3 supreme god realm. Since he already knew of his existence, he actually dared to do something like sitting on his head. Didn't he know how to spell the word death? At this moment, he had an unprecedented killing intent towards the common people's regal. You're courageous, the Void Emperor said in a low voice. Anyone could hear the anger in his voice. You have to be brave. Zhou 16 shook his head and said with a sigh, an expert who can turn me into ashes in the blink of an eye is right beside me. If I didn't have the guts to act a little more pretentiously, how could I make you think that I didn't discover you, senior? Even though it's a bit of a gamble. A faint smile appeared on Zhou 16's lips. But I think I won the bet. The Void Emperor did not speak after hearing this. However, the anger in his heart was accumulating rapidly. This guy! How dare he? Not only did he blatantly say that he was teasing him, but his tone was also showing off. Even though this was indeed worth showing off, didn't he know that the consequences of provoking the dignity of a powerhouse were very serious? At this moment, Zhou 16 seemed to know what the Void Emperor was thinking and clicked his tongue in wonder. Let me guess. Senior, the reason why you haven't attacked me for so long must be because of some restrictions, right? You were probably in a very bad state after you were beaten into faking death by the Supreme Will, even if you didn't really die, right? This should be the main reason why the Void Emperor could tolerate me for so long, right? This broken throne should be your shelter. You're afraid to come out. It's probably because something bad happens when you come out. For example, if you can't support your injuries, this throne can stabilize your injuries. If it appears, there's a risk of your injuries worsening or even dying suddenly. Another example is that this throne has the ability to hide your own body. It's fine if you don't come out, but if you appear, you will immediately be discovered by the Supreme Will. Then, there's also the risk of death. I wonder if I'm right. Zhou 16 said with a smile. The Void Emperor looked at Zhou 16 and said softly. To remain calm in the face of a great enemy. The Supreme Will has chosen a good successor. Why don't you follow me? Our ultimate void race is best at searching for ownerless treasures in the ultimate void great cosmos. Over the years, we have accumulated countless true treasures. Among these supreme treasures, there's no lack of supreme will treasures, and even eternal immortal realm treasures. I even specially built a void treasure vault for these countless treasures. If you follow me, I can make you my successor. I can let you choose any treasure in the treasure vault. How about that? The Void Emperor asked sincerely. Your lordship's offer is very tempting. However, that's all. Forgive me if I don't agree. After all, I also have hundreds of millions of treasures. While it's not as high grade as the treasures in the Void Treasury that you mentioned, it's good enough for a junior. As for willpower treasures or even eternal immortal realm treasures, even if it's in my hands, I'm afraid I won't be able to control it. I'm only a grade 3 supreme god realm after all. Zhou 16 said. He was telling the truth. Even though Zhou 15 was using the willpower treasure of the reality cube to disguise his identity, the power of the will treasure had always been provided by the Supreme Will. Zhou 15 was only using the power of the Supreme Will. Therefore, Zhou 15 was not jealous of that treasure at all. Even if that treasure really fell into his hands, he wouldn't be able to use it after all. he would be no different from trash. He had once been able to use the divine artifact's chaotic holy power at a higher level. After he advanced to the supreme god level, he had already reached the upper limit. He had to use the power of his willpower if he wanted to control a supreme wool treasure. However, even so, he could only use it for a short period of time. If he used it for a long time, his willpower wouldn't be able to last long. If he wanted to control a supreme wool treasure, he had to use the power of his willpower. But even so, he could only use it for a short period of time. If he used it for a long time, his willpower wouldn't be able to last long. He couldn't use it. He really couldn't use it. Oh! The Void Emperor said in a low voice, then aren't you interested in the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal fragment in your hand? Do you want to know its secret? As long as you are willing to join me and find me a body to possess, I can share this secret with you. I can tell you first. This secret concerns the top expert of the ultimate Void Great Cosmos, the secret of an eternal realm expert. The Void Emperor's tone was very sincere. Zhou 16 thought seriously for a moment before saying, then you have to tell me the general contents of this secret first. Otherwise, how do I know if I should believe you? The Void Emperor fell silent. He said after a long while. Okay. I can tell you. However, when you find out the secret, you're going to find me a body to possess. If you're willing to give me the fragment of the illusionary legendary tier voice in your hand, I can share the details of this secret with you and let you witness the scenery on the peak with me. Chapter 1718. Killing the Void Emperor. 2. How'd it go? Don't think of running away when you know the secret and trying to keep it to yourself. First of all, one of the illusionary legendary tier sage seals is in my hands. You can't open that secret with just your own fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sage seal. Secondly, even if you can gather all the fragments of the illusionary legendary tier sage seal, you alone, a grade 3 supreme god realm, can't open this secret. You need a willpower expert like me to open this secret and let us share it. You need me. The Void Emperor said. I see. This illusionary legendary tier sage seal is indeed related to an eternal immortal realm expert to make you beg me so humbly. Zhou 16 flipped his right hand and saw his illusionary legendary tier sacred seal fragment appear in his hand. I knew it was something special. Just as I expected. Zhou 16 muttered to himself. However, he wasn't too excited. The eternal immortal realm inheritance? The supreme sacred body that he was currently cultivating was a part of the eternal immortal realm inheritance. If he could become the only supreme lord in the future, he would steadily obtain the eternal immortal realm inheritance from the supreme will. Therefore, in the eyes of Zhou 16, the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal fragment that the Void Emperor regarded as the highest secret, was only so-so. Who doesn't? The Void Emperor also noticed Zhou 16's expression. It was not the expression he had imagined. His heart sank as he had a bad premonition. If it comes down to it, I'll just have to take the risk. Even though I'll be discovered by the Supreme Will, as long as I can snatch the fragment of the legendary tier sacred seal from the common people's regal before the Supreme Will descends on me, I'll escape immediately. I have a chance of surviving and getting what I want. As long as I escape the range of the Supreme Great Cosmos, no one can capture me in the ultimate void other than Eternal Realm experts. A ruthless look appeared in the Void Emperor's eyes. For the sake of the Eternal Immortal Realm inheritance, he would risk it all. He quietly activated the power of his will and set up a will domain around Zhou 16. A cold smile appeared on the Void Emperor's face after setting up this will domain. With this will domain, let alone others, a mere common people's regal would definitely not be able to escape from his palm. Not to mention the common people's regal. Even if a Supreme Will Realm expert was here, it was impossible for them to escape. At the same time, when he attacked the common people's regal, this will domain could also try its best to hide the movements of its attack and delay the time when the Supreme Will discovered this place and rushed over. Common people's regal. I'll ask you one last time. Do you want to cooperate with me? Share the secrets of the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal fragment. Let me remind you one last time. This secret concerns the eternal immortal realm. If you miss this opportunity, when you become a Supreme Will Realm expert in the future and discover the true preciousness of the eternal immortal realm secret, you will definitely regret it. The Void Emperor said in a low voice. Of course I understand. But... Zhou 16 smiled. I really don't trust you. Boom. A terrifying willpower suddenly erupted, stirring up a willpower gale that blew up Zhou 16's hair. However, not only did this not make Zhou 16 look messy, he instead revealed a wild and dangerous beauty. His eyes were bright. He was completely unafraid of everything in front of him. Il was like a young hero who had seen a terrifying dragon for the first time. His eyes were filled with smiles and there was no fear at all. Your Excellency Void Emperor. You finally couldn't take it anymore. I wondered how long you'd have to put up with a junior like me. In fact, I'm already beginning to be surprised at your patience. Zhou 16 said with a smile. In fact, I'm already beginning to be surprised at your patience. This expression and posture was not something that could be faked. He seemed to really have the confidence to face all his methods. It was just a grade 3 Supreme God realm, where did he get so much confidence? He did not hide his doubts and directly asked. Zhou 16 did not say a word. And behind him came a terrifying voice that made the Void Emperor's hair stand on end. It was even unforgettable in his dreams. The confidence of his naturally came from me, of course. A gentle yet majestic figure appeared behind Zhou 16. It was the Supreme Will. Greetings, Lord Supreme Will. Zhou 16 smiled and said respectfully. The Supreme Will nodded slightly and smiled. Well done. This guy's ultimate void escape is one of the top 3 escape techniques in the ultimate void cosmos. Even I would find it difficult to find him if he used this escape technique to escape. Fortunately, you lured him out. Otherwise, we might really let him escape. It's my duty. And it's not my style to let the enemy escape. Zhou 16 smiled. He had already informed the Supreme Will the moment he realized that something was amiss. As for the fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal? How could it be more important than his own life? The Supreme Will nodded in satisfaction. He was getting more and more satisfied with this little guy. The Void Emperor, who had been left aside, felt his entire body turn cold. He now understood everything. It turned out that everything this kid did before was just to stall for time until the Supreme Will arrived. No wonder this kid had been spouting nonsense for so long. The Void Emperor, who had figured everything out, gritted his teeth. However, when he saw the figure of the Supreme Will, he couldn't help but feel fear. Escape. I have to escape. We can't just sit back and do nothing. The ultimate void escape. The Void Emperor burned 99% of his willpower again and activated the ultimate void escape to escape. Ili's heart was bleeding. The ultimate void escape was very harmful to him. He had already used it once before, and that time made his already serious injuries worse. Now that he had used it again in order to escape, he wasn't even sure if he would still be alive after his ultimate void escape ended. However, he had no choice but to use it. Otherwise, he would die immediately. It's better to die by my own hands than by the hands of the Supreme Will. The Void Emperor gritted his teeth and was about to escape. At that moment, the Supreme Will suddenly looked at him coldly. The same trick won't let you escape a second time. The Supreme Will said coldly. He waved his right hand and saw the ultimate void in front of him crack layer by layer, revealing the Void Emperor who was escaping through the ultimate void. Escape. The Void Emperor originally thought that he could escape, but he did not expect to see this scene when he turned around. He was extremely shocked as he shrieked, "You can actually break through the ultimate void! You can actually break through the ultimate void!" He had a look of complete despair. How dare I provoke such an existence and survive to this day? Oh! He was crushed to death by the power of the Supreme Will. Zhou 16 clicked his tongue. Il finally understood why the Void Emperor had lost so quickly. The two of them were on completely different levels. He stole a glance at the Supreme Will. The Supreme Will, who had just finished doing all this, had an indifferent expression. He was completely different from a powerhouse who had just killed a willpower. It was as if he had just crushed an ant. Oh, Lord Supreme Will! Zhou 16 could not help but ask, have you really touched that realm? The Supreme Will nodded slightly, then shook his head slightly. I was lucky enough to catch a glimpse but not to the extent of getting it. The Illusionist clan would never invade my supreme great cosmos if I really touched that realm. He said lightly. Zhou 16 nodded and clicked his tongue again. He had only taken a peek at the power of the eternal immortal realm but he was already able to crush a willpower expert. How strong would a true eternal realm expert be? Zhou 16 could not help but yearn for it. Chapter 1719. The Mystery of the Ultimate Void Battlefield. 1. The Supreme Will waved his right hand, and a holy white dot of light flew out from the damaged purple throne and landed in the Supreme Will's hand. Zhou Zhou's heart skipped a beat when he saw this dot of light. Through the fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal in the number 1 treasure vault, he sensed that the thing inside the light spot was another fragment of the legendary tier sacred seal. The Supreme Will should be able to recognize him easily, right? If only I could have it. Zhou Zhou thought to himself. Unexpectedly, just as he had this thought, he saw the Supreme Will throw the fragment of the legendary tier sacred seal in his hand to him. Zhou Zhou subconsciously caught it and was at a loss. Given to him so easily. This was a treasure that concerned an Eternal Realm expert. Even someone as powerful as the Supreme Will should be very concerned, right? At this moment, the voice of the Supreme Will rang out. Consider this your reward. You can't go back empty-handed since that's why you're here. Zhou Zhou hesitated for a moment before asking. Do you know what this thing is, Supreme Will? He still did not know what this so-called illusionary legendary tier sage seal was. He only knew that it was related to an Eternal Realm expert. However, he was still very puzzled as to what it was. He had no idea how to use it. Judging from its aura and name, it most likely belongs to the Illusionist clan. It should be the inheritance of an Eternal Realm expert of the Illusionary clan. However, only by gathering all the pieces can you get the legacy. Difficult. Too difficult. The Supreme Will shook his head. Is it difficult? Zhou Zhou looked at the fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sage seal in his hand and scratched his head. Why did I find it so easy? He hadn't even searched much, but he had already gathered 3 of these so-called fragments. There are only 5 pieces of this thing and I already have more than half of it. Don't compare yourself to other creatures. One look at Zhou Zhou's expression and the Supreme Will knew what he was thinking. He said speechlessly. The first reason you can get it is because you have great luck. Everything good and good will come to you, including this fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sage seal. Secondly, you might have some affinity with this thing. Otherwise, in terms of luck, I'm much luckier than you. But why did it find you and not me? There's a high probability that your luck suits its taste. Life forms seek treasures, and treasures seek their owners. You must be the one. Wants. Zhou Zhou nodded. There's nothing wrong with that. Luck could allow good things to constantly gather on those with rich luck. However, who would the treasure be looking for when 2 people with the same luck encountered the same treasure? At that moment, it would depend on the compatibility between the person with great luck and the treasure. That's what they call affinity. It's good to see you again. Those with great luck and treasures would naturally come together. Those with great luck might obtain other treasures of the same level as this treasure, but the original treasure would not look for you. Instead, it would look for the master it liked more. Zhou Zhou looked at the fragment of the illusionary legendary tier sage seal in his hand. Could I really have a good compatibility with it? It seemed to be the case, recalling the experiences he had along the way. He didn't even have to exert much effort before this thing came up to him. Zhou Zhou could not help but laugh. Seeing this, the Supreme Will could not help but shake his head with a smile. Common People's Regal was indeed the one with the most outstanding luck among Eli's peers, among Eli's 4 successors. Lord Supreme Will, don't you need this? Zhou Zhou pointed at the illusionary legendary tier sacred seal fragment in his hand and asked curiously. I have it. Moreover, at my level, I already have my own path. The inheritance of a few more Eternal Realm experts is just a reference for me. A few more won't make much sense. It's the same for you. Don't take this thing too seriously, the Supreme will warn solemnly. In the future, you can imitate how they broke through when you want to break through to the realm of supreme willpower or even the realm of willpower. However, this thing can only be used as a reference when you're about to break through to the eternal immortal realm in the future. It may lead you astray if you value it too much. Understood. Zhou Zhou nodded thoughtfully. Then, he stopped thinking about it. The eternal immortal realm was too far away from him. It was enough for him to know how to break through to the unparalleled willpower realm or even the willpower realm. At this moment, the Supreme Will asked again. This is one of the pieces. How many more pieces do you have on your side? 2. Zhou Zhou replied honestly. In other words, you need 2 more fragments to gather the complete illusionary legendary tier sage seal. It's a little difficult. I can tell you first. I just searched through the entire Supreme Great Cosmos and didn't find any traces of the other two illusionary legendary Tier Sage Seal fragments. In other words, the remaining two fragments are not in the Supreme Great Cosmos. They are most likely in other places in the Ultimate Void Great Cosmos, or even in the world of the Illusionist clan. Even though you have great luck to protect you and this inheritance seems to be very favorable to you, you have to be prepared not to obtain these two fragments in a short period of time. Rest assured, Supreme will. Zhou 16 grinned. I'm only a grade 3 Supreme God realm. I'm not in a hurry to inherit the eternal immortal realm. Chapter 1720. The Mystery of the Ultimate Void Battlefield. 2. I understand that the most important thing now is to continue to improve my cultivation and strive to break through to the Supreme Will realm as soon as possible. We'll talk about it later. I don't think so far ahead. You have a good attitude. The Supreme Will praised. Then, he looked at the battlefield and smiled. This Ultimate Void battleground is completely safe from now on. Take care of this place from now on. Don't underestimate this place. I spent a lot of effort to build this Ultimate Void battlefield back then. Due to some coincidences, its potential is not inferior to the High Continent, the River of Time, and the Twilight battlefield. Run this place well. It won't let you down. This place is no weaker than the High Continent, the River of Time, and the Twilight battlefield. Zhou 16 was shocked when he heard that. That's right. As for why? The Supreme Will smiled. You'll understand when you start running this place in the future. The Supreme Will vanished from his original spot after saying that, leaving Zhou 16 standing there in deep thought without another word. Not inferior to the High Continent, the River of Time, and the Twilight battlefield. Is the Ultimate Void battleground that strong? Other than the abundance of promotion energy in the Void Mystic realm and the fact that the Ultimate Void battlefield can capture ownerless treasures in the Ultimate Void Great Cosmos, why don't I know what other benefits this Ultimate Void battlefield has? Zhou 16 was suspicious. He thought for a moment and felt that he had to ask the Lord of 10,000 Evils. The Lord of 10,000 Evils had been operating the Ultimate Void battlefield before he came. If there were any secrets to this Ultimate Void battlefield, the Lord of 10,000 Evils would most likely know. However, he didn't go immediately. Instead, he took out the other two fragments of his illusionary legendary tier sacred seal and fused them with the new one. The three fragments completely fused together in no time. A text notification appeared. Treasure name, Illusionary Legendary Tier Sacred Seal, 2/5. Treasure grade, unknown. Treasure effect 1, in the process of awakening. Treasure description, unknown. Zhou 16 originally thought that there wouldn't be any changes in this fusion. This thing was still incomplete after all. Furthermore, there hadn't been any changes during the previous fusion. However, he never expected that the effects of the treasures would actually have the words in the process of awakening after the fusion. In the process of awakening. It's not complete yet. It's just 3 fragments, yet it can already display its effects. Zhou 16's eyes lit up. It is a good thing. I wonder how long we'll have to wait. Zhou 16 thought. However, he wasn't in a hurry. He then put the illusionary legendary tier sage seal back into the number 1 treasure vault, and then directly used the ultimate void travel to leave this place and return to the Lord of 10,000 Evils. As for the sacred zone, he had already obtained the Chaos Divine Treasure, the ultimate void crystal, and the illusionary legendary tier sage seal. There was nothing left for him here. He came to the Lord of 10,000 Evils in no time. At this moment, the Lord of 10,000 Evils was walking alone on the ultimate void battlefield. When Zhou 16 appeared in front of him, he revealed a stunned expression. Big brother, you're done so quickly. At this moment, Lord of 10,000 Evils was walking alone on the ultimate void battlefield. When Zhou 16 appeared in front of him, he revealed a stunned expression. Big brother, you're done so quickly. Zhou 16 asked, what are you doing here? I'm about to take my men out of here, and I'd like to see this place again before I leave. The Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled. If you can't bear to leave, why don't you run this place with me from now on? The Zhou 16 invited sincerely. The Lord of 10,000 Evils was immediately shocked when he heard this. He hurriedly said, forget it, forget it. It wasn't easy for me to leave this place and live my carefree life. I've even found a place to go on vacation. How can I come back here? Zhou 16 was speechless. This guy had just left the ultimate void battleground, yet he had already thought of a vacation location. How much did he want to leave this place? Zhou 16 shook his head and did not think too much about it. He directly asked, Demon Lord, do you know what's so special about the ultimate void battleground? Special? The Lord of 10,000 Evils was stunned. Then, he probed, is this the only ultimate void battlefield in the Supreme Great Cosmos and the Crimson Great Cosmos? Special? That's not what I meant. Zhou 16 was speechless. Then, he told Lord of 10,000 Evils the content that the Supreme Will had told him. Zhou 16 was speechless. Then, he told Lord of 10,000 Evils the content that the Supreme Will had told him. The ultimate void battlefield is not inferior to the High Continent. The River of Time and the Twilight battlefield. Are you kidding me? How come I didn't know? Zhou 16. Good God! What a good fellow! If even Lord of 10,000 Evils didn't know what was so special about the ultimate void battleground, how would he know? Had the Supreme Will hidden the benefits of the ultimate void battleground so deeply? At the same time, the Lord of 10,000 Evils felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The ultimate void battleground actually had a secret that he did not know? Moreover, this secret made it comparable to the High Continent, the River of Time, and the Twilight battlefield? Is Big Brother joking? If it wasn't a joke and was real, then what had he been doing in the ultimate void battleground for so many years? That was tens of thousands of years. I really didn't get anything out of it except suffering. Thinking of this, the Lord of 10,000 Evils felt that his Dao heart was about to collapse. Now, he felt like a person from an ordinary family who suddenly knew that he had missed out on $1 billion. Who would be able to accept this? Just as Zhou 16 was feeling depressed, he also noticed Lord of 10,000 Evils' devastated expression. The moment he thought about it, he knew what Lord of 10,000 Evils was going through. He couldn't help but laugh. The Lord of 10,000 Evils was truly miserable compared to him. Good brother. Zhou 16 patted the Lord of 10,000 Evils on the shoulder. It's fine if you didn't know in the past, but now that you know, you should come back and help me. I guarantee that you will have a share of the benefits of the ultimate void battleground. Zhou 16's words were sincere, just like how he treated his subjects. As long as they treated him well, he could repay them tenfold or even 100-fold. The Lord of 10,000 Evils looked very conflicted when he heard this, but in the end, he still exhaled and decisively said, a good man never goes back on his words. Since I didn't discover the benefits of obscure here when I was here, it means that this thing is destined not to belong to me. A relieved smile appeared on the Lord of 10,000 Evils' face. I still prefer the life I yearn for. Zhou 16 patted Lord of 10,000 Evils on the shoulder. No matter what, Big Brother welcomes you back. Thank you, Big Brother. A smile appeared on the Lord of 10,000 Evils' face. Then, Zhou 16 and the Lord of 10,000 Evils chatted for a while before the Lord of 10,000 Evils bade farewell and left. Zhou 16 watched as Lord of 10,000 Evils led the army under him away from the ultimate void battleground before turning around to look at the battlefield. What are the real benefits of the ultimate void battlefield? After thinking for a long time, Zhou 16 decided not to guess. He was going to cheat. He flipped his right hand, and the Bodhi Supreme appeared in his hand. I know what you are going to ask. Bodhi Supreme smiled and said, as for this question, I'll give you a discount. A chance to answer ordinary questions will do. Okay. Zhou 16 still agreed even though he was somewhat curious as to why the answer was so cheap. The answer to that question is simple. When you send troops to occupy all the cities in the ultimate void battleground, you will see the benefits of the ultimate void battleground. The Bodhi Supreme said. Zhou 16 nodded. Bodhi Supreme nodded. That's it. Zhou 16 was taken aback. That's it. The Bodhi Supreme said truthfully. That's the answer. The Zhou 16 was shocked. Why do you think it's so cheap? The Bodhi Supreme asked. Zhou 16 was momentarily at a loss for words when he heard that. Chapter 1721. Arriving at the Yellow River. Door 1. Why didn't you just tell me? Zhou 16 could not help but ask. There's no sense of surprise if I just tell you. Understand? The Bodhi Supreme smiled. Zhou 16 was speechless. Why did the Bodhi Supreme have such a personality? However, he couldn't be bothered to ask further since he didn't say anything. In any case, from his tone, the surprise effect of the ultimate void battlefield should be very easy to discover. He could just watch when the time came. Following that, he didn't waste any time. He immediately informed Zhang Yuankai and got him to send troops and subjects to garrison the various garrisons and cities in the ultimate void battlefield. He did not intend to transfer people from the main combat army. The soldiers of the main combat army followed Zhou Zhou's clones every day and fought against the opposing factions. They had no time to rest here. However, he planned to place the homes of the main combat troops here and configure the corresponding teleportation gate so that they could travel back and forth between the ultimate void battlefield and the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. At the same time, the resting and training bases of the main combat corps were also set up here. Even though the ultimate void battleground looked a bit lonely, it wasn't that lively. However, popularity came naturally when there were more people, so it was not a big flaw. Moreover, in the future, after the construction department of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom finished building all the various configurations here, they could completely turn this place into a void territory with a unique style. The living effect would not be much worse than in the modern world. In some aspects, it might even be better. Its strongest aspect was its cultivation. In the ultimate void battleground, especially in the void mystic realm, there was a huge amount of high-quality promotion energy. This promotion energy could help life forms speed up their cultivation and breakthrough. It was a supreme treasure land for living and cultivation. Zhou 16 used this place as the military base and home address of the main combat troops. He also had some thoughts of benefiting the soldiers. They had fought to the death for the Blazing Sun army, so the benefits given to they were considered very basic. Following that, Zhou 16 did not stay any longer. He returned to the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom and arrived at the Reincarnation Sacred Palace. He found his main body, Zhou Zhou, who was cultivating. Main body, I'm back. Just tell me what you want. Zhou 16 said lazily. I plan to send you to the ultimate void great cosmos to find an alternate universe that follows the path of a lord. Sneak in and obtain their war resources to complete the advancement of our territory. As for the target, I've already found it through the Bodhi Supreme. This is the summary of 0. Take a look for yourself. Zhou Zhou sent a document to Zhou 16's personal terminal. When Zhou 16 heard that, he immediately opened it. Alternate universe, yellow sky great cosmos. Otherverse scale, chaotic level. Willpower expert, 3 venerables, master of Zi Wei, Black Emperor Vastson, Sky Demon Dao ancestor. Lord's power limit, willpower beyond level Lord's power. Are you weaker than the Supreme Great Cosmos / Crimson Great Cosmos? In terms of the strength and level of the Lord faction, you are far superior to the Supreme Great Cosmos and the Crimson Great Cosmos. However, in terms of top combat strength, there is an 80% chance that you can't resist the Supreme Will and the Crimson Overlord. Recommended infiltration plan, 1 reincarnation. 2 camouflage. 3 negotiation. 4. Zhou 16 was deep in thought after reading it. He only looked up at Zhou Zhou after a long time. What do you think? Zhou Zhou asked. Nice place. Zhou 16 nodded in approval and admiration. There's actually a Lord faction with a transcendent will. This is already a multiverse civilization that has developed the path of a Lord to the extreme. We can't compare to them at all. Exactly. Zhou Zhou smiled. But it's also because of this that it has the value of being infiltrated by us. As long as we can successfully infiltrate it and obtain the Lord's resources, we might not have to worry about the resources of Supreme God level factions, Supreme Will level factions, and even Supreme Will level Lord factions in the future. Go ahead. Zhou 16 said as a smile appeared on Eli's face. Coincidentally, I'm also interested in the ultimate void cosmos. Even though Zhou 13 and Zhou 14 are also there, and I can know what the ultimate void cosmos looks like through their memories, how can it compare to my personal experience? How many troops are you planning to bring? Zhou Zhou nodded and asked. No troops. Zhou 16 nodded. Just like 15, let the reality cube replace a divine kingdom lord in the yellow heaven great cosmos and let me directly participate in the lord contest of them. That's all right. Zhou Zhou only thought for a moment and knew that this was the best way, so he nodded and agreed. Then, Zhou Zhou and Zhou 16 chatted for a while before Zhou 16 set off. He was very strong in execution. He left just like that. After Zhou 16 left, Zhou Zhou did some divination. In the end, his divination was in complete chaos because they were in a different universe. He could only predict that Zhou 16 would be able to achieve their goal without any mishaps. The great cosmos of the other world is indeed troublesome. The environment of the laws is different, causing my talent in various spells to be severely weakened. I want to be promoted to a supreme will powerhouse as soon as possible. This way, I can use the power of my will to forcefully understand what will happen to Zhou 16 in the future. I don't have to feel as uncomfortable as looking at flowers in the fog. Zhou Zhou lamented. The laws comprehended in the supreme great cosmos would more or less be weakened because of the change in the nomological environment after leaving the supreme great cosmos. Chapter 1722. Arriving at the Yellow River. Door 2. It was like they were not acclimatized, and this was only in the void. Their strength would be greatly weakened again when they entered the alternate universe with an owner. Only by advancing to the supreme willpower realm could they avoid such an effect by opening their willpower domain. And because of that, god spirits below the supreme will realm rarely ventured into other alternate universes unless it was necessary. At most, they would only travel in the ultimate void great cosmos. The supreme sacred body also had an effect similar to the will sacred domain. However, the supreme sacred body was more direct compared to the will sacred domain. When the supreme sacred body below the supreme will realm came to an unfamiliar nomological environment, it would quickly develop a lord talent that was suitable for the environment to help the owner of the supreme sacred body live better in the alternate universe. When he reached the supreme sacred body realm and above, when he came to the alternate universe, the owner of the supreme sacred body did not need to activate an extremely obvious will domain to maintain his combat strength. His supreme sacred body would automatically adjust to the nomological environment of this universe to ensure that his combat strength would not be affected. Even though the final outcome of the two was the same, there was no doubt that the supreme sacred body was more convenient and secretive in integrating into the environment with the enhancement of the Lord talent. Moreover, it was extremely easy for the owner of the supreme sacred body to grow. Personally, Zhou Zhou naturally liked and admired the adaptation and development methods of the supreme sacred body more. Following that, Zhou Zhou stopped paying attention to Zhou 16's matters and turned Li's attention to Zhou Fight. At this moment, Zhou Fight had already led 20 Grade 3 Supreme God Realm experts to the Yellow River token. When they arrived at the Yellow River dockyard, Yan Luo immediately led a group of Yin Ghost clan subordinates over. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Yan Luo and the other god spirits said respectfully. Zhou Fight nodded. He looked at the sky above the Yellow River and his expression immediately turned slightly solemn. This was because at this moment, the sky of the Yellow River was shockingly enveloped by a large amount of faint yellow river chi, causing the environment of the entire Yellow River to appear very oppressive and low. Even though the Yellow River was a little sinister in the past, it was not to this extent. This situation could only be caused by the fact that something was about to begin in the Yellow River. Yan Luo also noticed what Zhou Fight was paying attention to. He immediately said respectfully in a low voice. "Your Majesty, the phenomenon of the Yellow River chi in the sky has been going on for 3 days. We once sent our subordinates to observe the source of the Yellow River chi. In the end, we discovered that the Yellow River chi came from 2 mountains, Hades Mountain and Lifespan Mountain. These 2 mountains have been releasing dense Yellow River chi all day long. Today, they can already envelop the entire Yellow River." Zhou Fight nodded. He looked at the Yellow River token in the number 1 treasure vault. At this moment, the Yellow River token was trembling non-stop, as if it had sensed a mysterious summon and was about to fly away. Zhou Fight thought for a moment and took it out. Then, he saw the Yellow River token that he had just taken out suddenly released a bright yellow pillar of light. This pillar of light shot into the sky, illuminating a large area of the Yellow Springs clouds in the sky. Under the illumination of this faint yellow pillar of light, the clouds of the Yellow River churned endlessly, as if something mysterious was about to appear. "I still need the help of other Yellow River tokens to open the inheritance inside," Zhou Fight muttered to himself. It was as if a mysterious existence had heard his words. Another faint yellow pillar of light flew over from the distant southeast and shot straight at the churning Yellow River's chi. With the help of the 2 pillars of light, the Yellow River chi immediately churned even more violently. One could vaguely see some mysterious corners hidden within the door. Zhou Fight muttered to himself. Zhou Fight could still tell that it was part of the door even though that was only the tip of the iceberg. Moreover, the style was somewhat similar to the ghost god's entrance to the netherworld, but it was also different. Is the Yellow River inheritance behind the door? Zhou Fight had a guess. On the other side, not sure how far apart, a terrifying existence wearing a flaming divine robe with a towering divine body like a star was looking at the churning clouds of the Yellow River from afar. The owners of the 4 Yellow River tokens have finally arrived. The Yellow River inheritance is finally about to open. He said softly, but his voice rumbled and shook the world. Your Highness. Beside him, a skinny elder one dressed in luxurious clothes said respectfully and curiously, I heard that the owner of the 4th Yellow River token is the recently famous Your Excellency, the common people's regal. I've never seen that excellency. A mere Supreme Lord Reserve Army. The rumors of the myriad races are too exaggerated to be believed, the person called His Excellency said lightly. The only thing that he can be proud of is probably the activation of the Lord's Kingdom of Master God tier. However, it's hard to say how much help from the Supreme Will is behind this matter. Perhaps the Supreme Will is behind this achievement. This common people's regal is just someone that the Supreme Will pushed out to bear the credit. Hehe, just adding glory to him. He said disdainfully. Your Majesty Tianyang Wazhu. Watch your mouth. The skinny elder one immediately said anxiously upon hearing this. At the same time, he carefully looked around, afraid that there were people monitoring and spying on them. After realizing that no one was looking at them, the skinny elder one smiled bitterly and said solemnly. There's no mistaking the fame. The common people's regal must have real ability to be able to make such a big name for himself. Moreover, no matter what, the common people's regal is the successor of the Supreme Will. If we are disrespectful to him, it would mean that we are disrespectful to the Supreme Will. Prime Minister Wu, how could it be so serious? Tianyang Wazhu shook his head. He's just a mere Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army. He is not even a real Supreme Lord. So what if I insult him? Even if he were to become the Supreme Will in the future, he would still have to rely on my father. Towards the end, he said proudly. Prime Minister Wu shook his head helplessly. The 5th prince had not suffered too many setbacks. He was still too proud and unpolished. However, he could not say this, so he could only remain silent. Come on. Meet His Excellency, the common people's regal, and see how capable he is to be able to withstand such a great reputation. Tianyang Wazhu licked his lips and said. Flames of excitement and anticipation flickered in his eyes, as if he was looking forward to the next meeting between the two gods. Yes, Your Grace. Prime Minister Wu could only say respectfully even though he knew that His Highness might have ulterior motives. At the same time, Zhou Fight was also recalling the 6 conditions that the Bodhi Supreme had told his main body back then. First, defeat the other 3 opponents who are competing for the inheritance of the will of the Netherworld head-on. Collect their Yellow River token and fuse it into the Netherworld Sacred Token. This is the key to opening the inheritance of the will of the Netherworld. You have to obtain it. Otherwise, you won't be able to open the door to the inheritance. Second, find the Yellow River Slate and recite the Yellow River's secret words recorded on the Yellow River Slate in the land of inheritance of the Yellow River's will. Only then can you officially become the inheritor of the Yellow River's will. Third, find the Yellow River Emperor's sword. Third, find the Yellow River Emperor's sword. This sword was the Law Saint artifact of the Yellow River. With it, one could rule the entire Yellow River and become the actual owner of the Yellow River. They could even kill all the souls of the Yellow River with a word. If the owner of the Yellow River token had it, his inheritor status would increase by another level, and he would be closer to the Yellow Springs inheritance. Fourth, the inheritor's nomological path must be related to the Yellow River laws. Fifth, fight against the Illusionist clan and take back the Yellow River. As for the 6th condition, it was a little special. The 6th condition. Only those who care about all living beings can obtain the final inheritance of the Yellow River's will. I should be able to pass, right? Zhou Fight muttered to himself. Chapter 1723. Door to the Yellow River. 1. Just then, 2 more yellow pillars of light flew over from afar, shooting straight at the churning clouds of the Yellow River in the sky. The mysterious thing hidden behind the twilight cloud finally revealed its full appearance under the 4 yellow pillars of light. It was a huge yellow door that almost covered the sky. The design of the gate was exactly the same as the gate to the Netherworld. However, the door to the Netherworld was grey, and this door was dim yellow, almost the same color as the clouds of the Yellow River. This is the predecessor of the gate of the Netherworld, the gate of the Yellow River. Zhou Fight looked at the huge door and flipped through the bloodline inheritance of the myriad races in his mind. Finally, he found the origin of the huge door in the Netherworld race's inheritance. Zhou Fai looked at the huge door and flipped through the bloodline inheritance of the myriad races in his mind. Finally, he found the origin of the huge door in the Netherworld race's inheritance. When the Chaos Great Cosmos was first established, before the Supreme Will and the Crimson Overlord fell out, the Chaos Will was still their father. At that time, even though there was one in the Netherworld, its jurisdiction was extremely loose. Any living being with extraordinary tier power could freely travel between the Netherworld and the land of the living. Ghosts can come and go as they please. As a result, land of the living was often harassed by the ghosts of Netherworld. As for malicious ghosts harming people, resurrecting corpses was even more common. The laws of life and death were extremely chaotic, and not many god spirits even dared to take these two paths. At that time, this matter had become a huge matter that had to be resolved in the chaotic great cosmos. The Chaos Will also noticed this matter, so he ordered the powerhouses who were willing to establish order in both lifetimes and had morals to jointly establish the laws of both lifetimes. This allowed the Netherworld to become the reincarnation place of the ghosts, and it also allowed the land of the living to not be disturbed by the ghosts of the Netherworld and become a place for life forms to call themselves. They quickly formulated the laws of the two lifetimes after these experts received the mission. However, they quickly realized that laws alone were useless. The most important thing was to block the path between two lifetimes, preventing living beings from entering and leaving each other's worlds. Hence, they decided to create a door. A world gate that could isolate the great Dao of Yin and Yang. This was the origin of the Gate of the Yellow River. However, because it was the first version of the door to the Yellow River, it wasn't long before something went wrong with it. Therefore, after they took it down, they developed the second version of the door to the Netherworld, which was also the most perfect barrier door. And this door to the Netherworld had been used until today. The initial version of the door to the Yellow River was unknown. Very few experts mentioned it. Now that they saw the Gate of the Yellow River that resembled the Gate of the Netherworld, Zhou Fai realized that the initial version of the Gate of the Yellow River had fallen into the hands of the Will of the Yellow River and was used to protect his inheritance. Go! Check it out! Zhou Fai ordered. Then, he immediately flew towards the door with Eli's 20 Grade 3 Supreme God Realm subordinates. Il also saw the other 3 streams of light flying towards the door to the Yellow River as he flew. As expected, these 3 streams of light were naturally the forces of the Sun Divine Court and the 2 illusionary clans. Zhou Fai retracted his gaze and ignored they as IE continued flying over. They flew in front of the door to the Yellow River and saw the exact appearance of the 3 forces. Among them, the 5th Prince of the Sun Divine Court, Tian Yang Huazhu, was the most eye-catching existence. He had a huge body that was comparable to a small star. And under Zhou Fai's divine eye, he discovered that his true form was indeed a scorching star. Moreover, this star's aura was extremely similar to the sun's stars. It was just that its level was much lower, but it was still at the quasi-supreme will realm. As expected of regal great solar's sun. Zhou Fai thought to himself. As for the other 2 forces of the Illusionist clan. One of them, the Illusionist clan, was covered in blood-red umbilical cords. There was a pair of white eyes without black pupils on its face, and there were bloody bone holes under its eyes. Under the bone holes was a ferocious mouth that was curved to the ears. His greatest characteristic was that his stomach was extremely large. He looked like a pregnant woman. Zhou Fai stood extremely far away and could even hear the strange heartbeat in his stomach. The other member of the Illusionist clan was quite ordinary compared to the one next to him. However, he also had wounds of various sizes on his body, and these wounds were still bleeding non-stop. This made his aura very weak. However, even though his aura was clearly very weak, Zhou Fai felt that IE was more threatening than the big-bellied Illusionist clan beside him. These 2 concepts exuded the aura of a grade 4 supreme god. However, their true combat strength were probably not inferior to quasi-supreme willpower realm experts considering that there was a conceptual god cultivation system. They might even far exceed quasi-supreme willpower realm experts. Zhou Fai narrowed his eyes. Not only was he not afraid, he was also looking forward to it. This was the first time he had fought against the Illusionist clan. Let him see what was so powerful about these Illusionist clan that even the Supreme Will, God King Heaven punishment, and they found it troublesome. Yet, right at that moment, he suddenly felt a change in his number 1 treasure vault. On the surface, he looked normal, but he looked over with the power of his will. Then, he was stunned. Because the first effect of the illusionary legendary Tier Sage seal appeared. Moreover, its effect was very powerful. It was so powerful that Zhou Fight did not know what to do. He couldn't help but take another look to confirm it. Treasure name, Illusionary Legendary Tier Sacred Seal, 3/5. Treasure grade, unknown. Chapter 1724. Door to the Yellow River. 2. Treasure effect 1 Death of Illusionist Clan, activate the power of the Illusionist Sage Seal, giving the owner of the Illusionist Sage Seal the power to kill all illusionist creatures. Every life form of the Illusionist clan that you have killed will be completely cut off from all life forms in this world and die. Treasure effect 2, unopened. You need to gather the remaining fragments of the Illusionary Legendary Tier Sacred Seal. Treasure description, the owner of this skull is De Huang of Illusionary. Zhou Fight's eyes widened. This thing could completely kill the Illusionist clan. Are you serious? Didn't the Supreme Will say that the Illusionist clan couldn't be killed? That was because the birth of the illusionary race was due to the power of imagination of the ordinary life forms in their world. As long as they remembered that existence, the power of imagination would not be cut off. As long as the power of imagination was cut off, the illusionist clan would always exist and be indestructible. Only the conceptual power of the illusionist clan could kill the illusionist clan. This fragment of the legendary tier sacred seal could kill the illusionist clan without using the conceptual power of the illusionist clan? No. There's another possibility. The illusionary legendary tier sage seal in my hand is a concept item. The death of illusionary is a conceptual ability. That's why it could kill the illusionist clan. However, even so, the effect of this item is outrageous. I'm not a member of the illusionist clan, but I can kill the illusionist clan with this concept item. When the illusionist clan finds out, they'll probably hunt me down and take this item back. Then, they'll destroy it or seal it forever. Otherwise, the existence of this item would be a huge threat to the illusionary race. We might even be able to use it to wipe out the entire illusionist clan. Zhou Fight instantly thought of many things. The more he thought about it, the more he valued this item. At the same time, Tianyang Huazu was also observing Zhou Fight. He curled his lips and said, "Apart from her good looks, there's nothing special about him. I really don't know why the Supreme Will would choose he as the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army. If Father didn't forbid us from participating in the Lord of All Races tournament, how could these grassroots people compete for the Supreme Lord Reserve Army?" Prime Minister Wu was speechless. He stood beside Tianyang Huazu. Even though Tianyang Huazu tried his best to hide it, he could still hear the obvious jealousy in his tone. Il could not help but look at Zhou Fight again. He could not help but praise in his heart. As expected of the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army chosen by the Supreme Will. Not only in appearance and temperament, but also in other aspects. Especially when comes to luck. Even though I can't see through his destiny, but when I look at him, I feel like I'm looking at the young regal Sunday. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Even if this common people's regal didn't become the Supreme Lord's Reserve and chose another path, I'm afraid his future is limitless. Then, he looked at the 2 illusionary legendary tier races. The Illusionist clan. Prime Minister Wu narrowed his eyes, his heart heavy. He had fought with the Illusionist clan before. However, even though he had seen so many Illusionist clan members, he still felt that these 2 Illusionist clan members were not simple, even among the conceptual gods of the Illusionist clan. Even in the entire Illusionist clan, these 2 Illusionist god spirits could be considered top-notch experts below the Supreme Will realm. This battle for the will of the Yellow River isn't too competitive. Prime Minister Wu thought to himself. He looked at common people's regal and thought to himself, should I practice with common people's regal to deal with these 2 guys? Just as he thought of this, he couldn't help but glance at Tianyang Huazu before sighing inwardly. Forget it, forget it. With His Highness temper, I'm afraid he's unwilling to cooperate with the common people's regal. He shook his head and stopped thinking about it. At the same time, the location of the Illusionist clan. The 2 Grade 2 Supreme God conceptual gods of the Illusionist clan were also communicating in secret. Demon Fetus, that's common people's regal. Wu Shang looked at the common people's regal and said to the demon fetus beside him. That's right, it's him. The demon fetus grinned and looked at common people's regal with admiration. What a handsome young man. When I absorb the essence of his flesh, blood and soul, the demon fetus that will be born will definitely be a demon fetus with the highest potential. He said with shining eyes. This guy is from the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army. His under the same sect as the God King Heaven punishment of the Twilight battlefield. It's not that Kazi. Wu Shang shook his head. So what? The demon fetus grinned. Even though this fellow's realm is alright, he is only a newly promoted reserve Supreme Lord. He has not even participated in the war at the Dusk battlefield and has only fought in the Supreme Great Cosmos. I could easily take on 10 of these new characters on the battlefield. Since you're so confident, why don't you take the lead later? Wu Shang asked. I'll take the lead. Just me. The demon fetus licked its scarlet lips. However, I have to say this advance. Since I'm the one taking the lead, his demon fetus has nothing to do with you. Don't think of taking advantage of me. The corners of Wu Shang's mouth twitched. You're the only one who treats the demon fetus like a treasure. Then, he looked at the common people's regal and licked his scarlet lips. Did he treat the Supreme Lord Reserve Army as a source of nutrition for the demon fetus? It sounds like it's going to be fun. He wondered what expression the Supreme Will and God King Heaven punishment would have when they saw the Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army being sucked dry. Wouldn't it be fun? Thinking of something interesting, a bloody smile appeared on his face. Right at that moment, he suddenly noticed that common people's regal was looking at him. Wu Shang was stunned, then he smiled. He was quite perceptive. He can actually feel my gaze from so far away. Not only did he not restrain himself at all, he even laughed even more arrogantly in front of the common people's regal. However, in the face of his arrogant smile, common people's regal actually revealed a strange expression. His expression was as if he had found a target and was very satisfied. Why do I feel that he is very fearless? This thought suddenly appeared in Wu Shang's mind. His expression was slightly gloomy. He was just a Supreme Lord's 4th Reserve Army, he really did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Since that was the case, later, he would teach this junior a lesson and let him know what it meant to revere the strong. Hey! Right at that moment, he and the demon fetus suddenly sensed something and looked up at the door to the yellow river above them. At the same time, Zhou Fight, Tianyang Wazu and the other god spirits also sensed something and looked at the gate of Yellow River. The gate of the netherworld summoned by the 4 yellow river tokens was trembling slightly. After a long time, faint yellow nomological words appeared on its surface. Zhou Fight looked at the words and read. If you want to open the gate of the Yellow River, you need to collect the Yellow River Emperor Sword and the Yellow River Stone Slab. Only those who hold the Yellow River Emperor Sword and the Yellow River Slate can open the door to the Yellow River and enter the land of inheritance of the Yellow River's will. Yellow River Emperor Sword. Yellow River Stone Slab. All the god spirits present were immediately attracted by these 2 items. I feel it. Zhou Fight narrowed his eyes and looked in 2 directions. Then, he sighed and said, these 2 treasures have finally appeared. His main body had long known that if he wanted to obtain the inheritance of the Yellow River's will, he had to obtain the Yellow River's will and the Yellow River's slate. In order to do things in the future, his main body had long asked the Bodhi Supreme where the Yellow River Emperor Sword and the Yellow River Slate were. He wanted to take them in advance to prepare for the battle for the inheritance of the Yellow River's will in the future. However, Bodhi Supreme told his main body that the Yellow River Emperor Sword and the Yellow River Slate had yet to appear. It was useless to ask him. Only after the 2 divine artifacts were born would he be able to calculate where they were. Even Bodhi Supreme did not know where these 2 things were, so his main body could only give up. Now that the inheritance of the Yellow River's will had been activated, these 2 divine artifacts had finally appeared. However, he did not set off immediately. Instead, he observed what the Illusionist clan and the Sun Divine Court would do next. In the end, he saw that the 2 factions had used some unknown method to quickly figure out their locations. Then, they directly flew in the direction of a divine artifact. Among them, the demon fetus flew towards the Yellow River Emperor Sword alone. As for the forces of the Sun Divine Court and Wu Shang, they flew in the direction of the Yellow River Slate. I thought I had it all to myself. You really can't underestimate the world. Zhou Fight shook his head. He was not surprised. Following that, he flew in the direction of the demon fetus without any hesitation. Chapter 1725. Killing the demon fetus. 1. The demon fetus turned around and saw common people's regal following behind him with 20 supreme gods. He couldn't help but grin, looking a little excited. That's bold. How dare you follow me here alone? I thought that he would timidly follow the powerhouse of the regal Great Solar faction to deal with Wu Shang. But, that's what I want. The demon fetus muttered to himself. He almost thought that he would not be able to obtain Common People's Regal's demon fetus. Now that Common People's Regal had followed him here, he could get what he wanted. He suddenly stopped and looked at the Common People's Regal and the 20 supreme gods behind him with the 200 supreme gods of the Illusionist clan behind him. Seeing this, Zhou Fight also stopped. The demon fetus said, Common People's Regal, let's fight here first since our goal is the Yellow River Emperor's sword. Only the strong who are alive are qualified to obtain the Yellow River Emperor's sword. Just what this emperor wants. Zhou Fight nodded. Ha ha ha, Common People's Regal. The aura of the demon fetus suddenly rose, and the surrounding blood energy danced wildly. A large number of baby faces could be vaguely seen in the blood energy. Then, babies flew out of his blood, at least 300 of them. Furthermore, the strength of each of these babies were not lower than that of supreme gods. The lowest was a grade 1 supreme god, and the highest was a grade 4 supreme god. I admire your courage. You actually chased after us with 200 supreme gods. The demon fetus voice was low. Today, you will be the first supreme lord to die among the 4 supreme lord reserve armies. Zhou Fight's expression was calm. You'll soon find out why I only brought 20 supreme gods. The demon fetus sneered and suddenly pointed at them with his right hand. The next second, the 300-plus demon infants screamed as they charged towards them. As for the 200-odd illusionary supreme gods behind him, some of them charged over directly, while others stayed where they were and used their conceptual abilities to attack Zhou Fight and the 20 supreme gods behind him. All of a sudden, even though the 20 supreme gods behind him were quite strong and had a full set of supreme divine artifacts, they still suffered considerable damage. Even though the 20 supreme gods behind him were quite strong and had a full set of supreme divine artifacts, they still suffered considerable damage. All sorts of strange injuries appeared on their body, making the scene very strange and terrifying. The Illusionist clan, which had the power of a conceptual god, was already very troublesome. Moreover, more than 200 supreme gods of the illusionary race attacked together with the conceptual ability of them. This situation was extremely difficult to deal with. This could be seen from the performance of the supreme gods under Zhou Fight. Under normal circumstances, even though they were only grade 3 supreme god realm supreme gods, there were not many of them. However, with the various enhancements of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom and their supreme divine artifacts, it was actually easy for them to defeat 200 supreme gods. However, they had not even fought with the supreme gods of the illusionary race, but they were already injured, and their combat strength had been weakened by more than half. It would be much more difficult than usual even if they could continue to fight the Illusionist clan. In addition, there were also more than 300 supreme god level demon infant released by the demon fetus. Most people would have thought that Zhou Fight would definitely lose in this situation. However, the demon fetus revealed a solemn and puzzled expression. This was because he saw that Common People's Regal was actually unharmed under the joint attack of them. It was as if he was in another world. Their attacks were completely ineffective against him. This guy is just a supreme god. How did him do it? The demon fetus narrowed his eyes. At the same time, Zhou Fight also took the opportunity to observe his supreme god's performances against the Illusionist clan. After watching for a while, he shook his head slightly. It was a poor performance. The supreme gods under him had no way to resist the conceptual attacks of the Illusionist clan. The differences in the god spirit system made they not know how to deal with this kind of offensive. Perhaps after experiencing the conceptual gods' attack for a long time, they could figure out a way to deal with them. However, if one only looked at the first battle, the conceptual gods' attack was almost invincible. The conceptual gods' attack is too unique. There are only 3 ways to defeat them. One is to have absolute control over them in terms of abilities and completely suppress them in terms of conceptual abilities. The other is to crush them in terms of strength. No matter how fancy the methods of these conceptual gods are, they are useless in the face of the absolute difference in strength. The other is to become a doctor after being ill for a long time. Through accumulating experience, one can figure out how to deal with them in terms of conceptual abilities, or even counter them in terms of conceptual abilities. Zhou Fight had the inheritance of all races, so he thought of 3 methods almost instantly. Then, he smiled faintly. Fortunately, in order to fight for the inheritance of the Yellow River's will, they only sent 3 grade 4 supreme god level Illusionist clan members. If they had come from the Illusionist clan at the supreme level of willpower, then there was really nothing he could do. But now, It would be easy to take care of this group of enemies. Right at that moment, the demon fetus in the distance finally could not hold it in anymore. If you like this novel, and want more videos, like, and subscribe.